On my 40th birthday, I stood frozen as cranberry juice dripped down my $5,000 dress. My wife's sister smirked. "Now you look as cheap as you really are." My wife's mom clapped. My wife washed with pride. But none of them knew. This night would be the turning point. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Turning 40 hit different. Not in that, "oh no, I'm old" kind of way that makes middle-aged dudes buy sports cars and start dating women who still think TikTok is a career path. Nah. For me, it was more like standing at a crossroads where one sign said, "Keep being a doormat," and the other said, "Grow a spine, dumbass." Guess which direction I'd been walking for the past decade? If you guessed doormat, congratulations, you're smarter than I was. So there I stood, on what was supposed to be my night, my big 4-0 celebration, in Seattle's swankiest restaurant, the Azure Room. And when I say swanky, I mean the kind of place where they describe water like it's a fine wine and charge you $30 for it. Spring-fed from the glaciers of Iceland. They'll say with a straight face while you're just sitting there thinking, "Bro, it's water." But whatever, I'd rented out their entire private hall, because apparently that's what you do when you're desperately trying to prove to your wife's vulture family that you're not some charity case who got lucky. The place looked like something out of a magazine spread. You know, the kind that makes normal people feel inadequate about their IKEA furniture. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like expensive tears. Tables were draped in fabric that probably cost more per yard than my first car. And there was an actual string quartet in the corner playing Vivaldi like we were at some aristocratic ball in 1780s Vienna instead of downtown Seattle, where it rains 9 months out of the year and everyone's perpetually caffeinated. I dropped serious cash on this shindig. We're talking imported champagne that came with its own certificate of authenticity because apparently grapes need resumes now. A 5-course tasting menu designed by a chef whose ego was bigger than his Michelin stars, and those little gold leaf appetizers that taste like bankruptcy but look Instagram-worthy. All because I needed, to show them. Show Sophia's mom that I wasn't the budget option she thought her daughter settled for. Show her sister that I had more going on than a decent credit score. Show everyone that Marcus Bennett wasn't just some guy who happened to marry into their precious family tree. And yeah, about that suit. My custom Tom Ford midnight blue number that I'd been calling my $5,000 dress, as a joke because it genuinely cost more than Sophia's wedding gown. The tailor had taken my measurements like he was sculpting Michelangelo's David, going on about drape and shoulder construction, while I nodded along pretending I understood the difference between notched and peak lapels. But I'll be damned if I didn't look good in it. The kind of good where waiters called you sir with actual respect instead of that passive-aggressive service industry tone that really means hurry up and tip me. Cheapskate. The night started out promising, honestly. My real friends showed up, people I'd known since college, business partners who actually respected me, Reggie with his big mouth and bigger heart. They were punctual, warm, brought thoughtful gifts that weren't just hastily grabbed gift cards from the Walgreens down the street. We were laughing, the champagne was flowing, and for a hot minute I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the birthday where everything clicked into place. Then at 7:30, a full hour and a half late, because apparently time is just a suggestion when you're as self-important as my in-laws, they made their grand entrance. And I do mean grand. Judith, my mother-in-law, walked in like she was expecting a red carpet and paparazzi, wearing some designer outfit that screamed, "I have opinions about your life choices." Zara, the sister-in-law from hell, strutted behind her wearing sunglasses indoors like she was hiding from fame she didn't have, her phone already out recording what I can only assume was riveting content for her 3,000 followers, 2,847 of which were definitely bots she'd bought during a wine-drunk online shopping spree. And then there was Sophia, my wife, the woman I'd pledged my life to in front of 200 guests and a priest who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She looked absolutely stunning in this velvet dress that hugged every curve, her dark hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless. The kind of beautiful that makes you forget for a second that beauty can be a really expensive package deal that comes with toxic in-laws and a monthly subscription fee to drama. No apologies for being late, naturally. Judith just waved her hand dismissively, like she was swatting away the concept of basic courtesy. Traffic was absolutely dreadful. Marcus and Zara's lashes needed extra glue. You understand. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A decree from on high that their time was simply more valuable than everyone else's. I smiled that smile I'd perfected over 10 years of marriage, the one that said, I'm unbothered, while internally I was calculating exactly how much this disrespect was costing me per minute. Of course, I said smoothly. Priorities before punctuality. After all, what's a birthday without properly glued lashes? The waiter who'd been standing nearby actually had to turn away to hide his smirk. At least someone appreciated my sarcasm. They sat down at the head table I'd specifically reserved for family, immediately ordering the most expensive items on the menu without so much as glancing at the prices. Why would they? It wasn't their credit card getting demolished. Zara ordered 3 appetizers just to try, which really meant she'd take 1 bite of each for the aesthetic and leave the rest. Judith asked if the chef could make something off-menu, because apparently the carefully curated 5-course meal wasn't good enough. And Sophia? She just smiled at me like this was all perfectly normal behavior, like I should be grateful they'd even showed up. The evening proceeded exactly as I should have predicted if I'd had even half a functioning brain cell. My friends made genuine toasts about our college days, about building my business from the ground up, about the actual substance of who I was as a person. Reggie stood up with his wine glass, grinning like the goofball he is, and said, to Marcus, living proof that good guys don't finish last, they just buy the whole damn restaurant. Everyone laughed, clinked glasses, and for a moment it felt real. Then Judith raised her glass with all the enthusiasm of someone being forced to acknowledge a parking meter. To Marcus, she said with that smile that never reached her eyes, our dependable man who's always around. The pause before around was deliberate, weighted with all the subtle disdain she'd cultivated over a decade of tolerating my existence in her daughter's life. Zara, never one to miss an opportunity to twist the knife, added with a giggle, and always paying. The table erupted in laughter. Their table, anyway. My friends shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their salmon courses. I kept smiling. That same practice smile that was becoming my default setting around these people. Inside, though, I was doing math, calculating interest on 10 years of patience, compound humiliation, the emotional toll of being treated like a walking wallet with arms. The numbers were adding up to something significant. Dessert arrived. This elaborate chocolate sculpture with Happy 40th Marcus, written in actual gold leaf because apparently regular frosting is for peasants. It was ridiculous and over the top, and I'd specifically requested it because I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd see the effort and appreciate it. Shows what I knew. I barely had time to admire the sugar craftsmanship before I noticed Zara leaning over to Sophia, whispering something with this wicked little smirk on her face. They both giggled like middle school mean girls who'd just come up with the world's most devastating insult. Then Zara picked up her cranberry mocktail, because of course she doesn't drink alcohol. She's cleansing, or whatever the current wellness trend dictates, and I watched in slow motion as she raised it, tilted it, and dumped the entire glass directly onto my chest. The cold liquid hit me like a shock, spreading across that expensive midnight blue fabric in an expanding stain that looked like I'd been shot in a really fruity assassination attempt. The table went silent. Everyone froze. And then Zara, with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences for anything in her entire privileged life, sneered, now you look as cheap as you really are. Judith actually clapped. Like applause. Like her daughter had just performed a piano recital instead of committing assault with a beverage. And Sophia, my wife, my partner, the person who was supposed to have my back, just watched with this expression of pride that made my stomach turn. The restaurant staff looked horrified. My friends looked ready to throw hands. Reggie was already halfway out of his seat. But me? I just calmly picked up my napkin, dabbed at the spreading stain with careful precision, and said in the most even tone I could manage, good thing it's stain-resistant. Unlike my patience. The laugh I got from my side of the table was genuine. The silence from theirs was deafening. And in that moment, watching cranberry juice drip onto my Italian leather shoes, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger exactly, though that was definitely brewing. Not even hurt, though yeah, that was there too. It was clarity. Cold, sharp, absolute clarity. This night wasn't the humiliation they thought it was. This wasn't another story they'd tell at their family brunches about how they keep Marcus humble or whatever justification they'd spin. This was documentation. Evidence. The final straw that I'd needed to stop being a doormat and start being the kind of man who actually valued himself. That night, my friends, was the turning point. They just didn't know it yet. Hell, I barely knew it yet. But as I sat there with cranberry juice soaking through my $5,000 suit, watching my wife's family laugh like this was peak comedy, something fundamental changed in me. The old Marcus would have laughed it off, paid the cleaning bill, and moved on like it was just another Tuesday in the Bennett household. But the new Marcus? The one being born right there in that moment with fruit juice dripping down his chest? He was already planning. Because here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you one hell of an advantage. Let me rewind the tape a bit, because you're probably wondering how the hell I ended up married into a family that treats me like a human ATM with premium processing fees. Fair question. Trust me, I ask myself the same thing at least 3 times a week, usually while lying awake at 3 in the morning questioning every life decision I've made since puberty. 10 years ago, I met Sophia at a tech conference in San Francisco, which sounds boring as hell, but stick with me here. I was 29, hungry, and riding the high of my consulting firm's first major contract with a Fortune 500 company. She was 27, working in luxury brand management, which I later learned was code for I tell rich people what to buy and take a commission. And she had this magnetic energy that made everyone in the room gravitate toward her like she was the sun, and we were all just planets desperate for warmth. She was smart, I'll give her that. Scary smart. The kind of woman who could calculate a tip faster than a calculator and remember the names of every person she'd ever met at a networking event. She quoted philosophy over cocktails, had opinions on wine regions I'd never heard of, and made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the room, even though I was just a tech nerd who got excited about cybersecurity protocols. Looking back, I think that was the hook. She made me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced before. Our first date was at this hole-in-the-wall Italian place in North Beach where the pasta was handmade and the wine came in mason jars. She laughed at my terrible jokes, touched my arm when she talked, and by the end of the night, I was completely gone. Like writing poetry in my head gone, which is embarrassing to admit, but there it is. 3 months later, we were exclusive. 6 months after that, I met her family. That should have been my first red flag the size of a football field. We drove up to Judith's house in Bellevue. And when I say house, I mean a sprawling colonial monstrosity with columns out front like she was cosplaying as a southern plantation owner in the Pacific Northwest. The lawn was so perfectly manicured it looked fake, like someone had installed AstroTurf but charged luxury grass prices. There was a fountain in the circular driveway, an actual fountain with cherubs and everything. I remember thinking, oh, so this is where Sophia gets her taste for expensive things. Judith answered the door in pearls. At 2 in the afternoon. On a Saturday. Who wears pearls to a casual family lunch? Apparently, people who need you to know they have money and you don't. She looked me up and down like I was a used car she was considering whether to buy, and I swear I saw her nose wrinkle slightly when she noticed my off-the-rack blazer from Nordstrom Rack. So you must be Marcus, she said, extending her hand limply like she expected me to kiss it instead of shake it. Sophia has told me so much about you. The emphasis on so much made it clear that exactly none of what she'd heard had impressed her. I shook her hand firmly anyway because my dad raised me right, smiled my best, meeting the parents' smile, and said, all good things, I hope. She didn't answer, just turned on her heel and led us into a living room that looked like it had been decorated by someone who'd never heard of the concept of comfort. Everything was white or cream or beige. The kind of color palette that screams, we don't actually live here, we just pose for catalog photos. There were decorative pillows on the couch that were clearly never meant to be used for actual pillow purposes, and I'm pretty sure the coffee table books had never been opened. That's when I met Zara. She was sprawled across an armchair with her phone in her face, scrolling through Instagram with the kind of focus most people reserve for important tasks like defusing bombs or performing surgery. She was 23 at the time, fresh out of college with a degree in communications that she'd somehow turned into a career of taking selfies and calling herself an influencer. Her bio said, lifestyle curator and wellness advocate, which as far as I could tell meant she took pictures of herself drinking green smoothies and occasionally posted inspirational quotes she'd stolen from actually successful people. Zara, We have a guest, Judith said with this weird sing-song voice that made my skin crawl. Zara looked up, gave me the same evaluating once-over her mother had, and said, "Oh, hi." Then she immediately went back to her phone. That was it. That was the entire introduction. No handshake, no questions about who I was or what I did, just a dismissive, "Oh, hi," like I was a piece of furniture someone had just delivered. Lunch was uncomfortable in that special way that only meeting your girlfriend's family for the first time can be. Every question felt loaded. Every answer I gave seemed to disappoint them in new and creative ways. Judith asked what I did for work, and when I explained that I ran a tech consulting firm specializing in cybersecurity and digital infrastructure for mid to large-sized companies, she smiled this tight smile and said, "Oh, how nice. So you fix computers?" Not exactly, I tried to explain. We help companies build secure networks, protect against cyber threats, implement cloud solutions, stuff like that. More consulting than repair work. She nodded like she was listening, but I could tell she'd already categorized me under tech support guy in her mental filing system, and nothing I said was going to change that. "And is that profitable?" she asked, which is just a polite rich person way of asking, "Are you poor?" Before I could answer, Zara piped up without looking up from her phone. "Mom, can you Venmo me for the Sephora order? The spring collection just dropped, and I need to get it before it sells out." Judith immediately pulled out her phone. "Of course, darling. How much? Like 300? Maybe 350. And just like that, $350 got transferred for makeup while I sat there having my career credentials questioned. The irony wasn't lost on me, though apparently it was lost on everyone else at that table. Sophia squeezed my hand under the table, gave me this apologetic look that said, "Just bear with them." And I did because I was in love and stupid and convinced that family dynamics would improve once they got to know me better. Spoiler alert, they didn't. The rest of lunch was more of the same. Judith asking invasive questions about my family background. Disappointed to learn my parents were middle-class public school teachers in Michigan, not business moguls or old money aristocrats. Zara occasionally interjecting with requests for money that Judith fulfilled without question. And Sophia playing mediator, laughing at her family's little jabs like they were jokes instead of judgments. By the time we left, I felt like I'd been through a job interview where I'd failed every question. In the car, Sophia assured me it went great. "They loved you," she said, which even then I knew was a lie. "Mom can be a bit particular, but she'll warm up to you." 10 years later, I'm still waiting for that warmth. What I got instead was a nickname, the budget husband. Yeah, you read that right. That's actually what they called me behind my back, and sometimes to my face when they thought they were being cute. Zara started it about a year into my relationship with Sophia, posting some stupid meme on her Instagram story about, "When your sister dates down, but at least he's financially stable," with a string of laughing emojis. Sophia thought it was hilarious. I thought it was degrading, but I laughed along because that's what you do when you're trying to fit into a family that's made it clear you don't belong. You laugh at jokes at your own expense and pretend it doesn't chip away at your self-respect piece by piece. The worst part? Judith actually said it to my face once at a family dinner. We were at some overpriced restaurant in downtown Seattle, because apparently, the Lee family doesn't eat anywhere that doesn't require reservations and valet parking, and the waiter brought the check. Without even looking at it, without even pretending to reach for her purse, Judith slid it across the table to me and said with this smile, "This is why Sophia married the budget husband. Always so dependable." Everyone laughed, even Sophia. And I sat there with that damn leather bill holder in my hands, looking at a total that could have fed a small country, and smiled like it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. Then I paid, because that's what I always did. That's what they expected. Over the years, I became their go-to bank. Need a girls' trip to Miami? Call Marcus. Want to upgrade your kitchen appliances to commercial-grade equipment you'll never actually use? Marcus has got you covered. Starting a boutique business that'll fail within 2 years, but sounds impressive at book club? Better hit up good old reliable Marcus. Zara's self-care retreats became a quarterly expense on my credit card. These weren't actual wellness retreats with meditation and yoga and finding yourself, or whatever. These were just regular vacations to expensive resorts where she'd take 1,000 photos in different bikinis, post them with captions about investing in herself, and rack up bar tabs that made my accountant send concerned emails with subject lines like, "We need to talk about your spending." Every time, Zara would promise to pay me back. I'm getting a brand deal soon, she'd say. This company wants to sponsor me. They're just finalizing the contract. The contract never materialized. The money never came back. But the requests kept coming, regular as clockwork, and I kept saying yes because Sophia would ask me to help out family, and I was too in love or too stupid to see the pattern. Judith was somehow even worse. She'd call with these emergencies that weren't actually emergencies, but required immediate financial intervention. Her refrigerator broke, except it didn't break. She just wanted a smart fridge with a screen and ice maker that could crush ice in 17 different sizes. Her roof was leaking, except the leak was minor, and the quote she got was for a complete roof replacement with solar panels. Every problem was an opportunity for an upgrade, and every upgrade was funded by the Bank of Marcus. The boutique, though, that was Sophia's dream, and I was genuinely supportive of it at first. She wanted to open a high-end fashion boutique in Capitol Hill featuring curated sustainable luxury brands, which sounded impressive until you realized it meant she'd buy expensive clothes from other designers, mark them up even more, and sell them to Seattle's wealthy elite who had more money than sense. I invested everything she asked for. Storefront lease in a prime location? Check. Interior designer to make it look like a minimalist fever dream? Done. Inventory from European brands that shipped via private courier because apparently regular shipping wasn't exclusive enough? You got it. Marketing budget for a launch party that cost more than most people's weddings? Of course. The boutique opened with champagne and influencers and local press coverage. Sophia was radiant, thanking everyone who'd supported her vision. She gave speeches about female entrepreneurship and following your dreams and building something from nothing. Everyone applauded. What she didn't mention was that the nothing she'd built it from was actually my bank account, or that my name was on exactly none of the business documents despite funding the entire operation. When I brought it up later, she kissed my cheek and said, "You know I couldn't have done this without you, baby. You're my partner." But when I suggested actually being a partner, like, legally, with my name on something, she got weird about it. Said it would complicate the business structure, that her brand identity needed to be independent, that I wouldn't understand the fashion world's dynamics. So I let it go, added it to the growing list of things I let go. And that list, my friends, was getting longer than a CVS receipt. So yeah, let me formally introduce myself since we're already deep into this disaster of a story, and you probably deserve to know exactly who's been bankrolling this circus. I'm Marcus Bennett, 40 years old as of that magical cranberry-soaked evening, and I run a tech consulting firm called Bennett Solutions that somehow managed to survive and thrive despite my personal life being an absolute dumpster fire. My parents would be proud of the business part, at least. The marriage part? That's a conversation I've been avoiding during our bi-weekly phone calls for about 3 years now. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is a perfectly nice college town where people are more concerned about football rankings than fashion labels, and where a fancy dinner means going to the Olive Garden on a Friday night. My dad taught high school math. My mom taught elementary school, and they both believed in this quaint old-fashioned concept called living within your means. Revolutionary, I know. They saved up for vacations, drove their cars until the wheels literally fell off, and taught me that money was something you earned through actual work, not something you just expected to appear because you existed and looked good in photographs. I was the kid who built computers in the basement, who got excited about coding languages the way other kids got excited about sports, who spent Saturday nights debugging programs instead of going to parties. Yeah, I was that nerd. Still am, honestly, except now I wear expensive suits and have a corner office with a view of Puget Sound, so at least I'm a successful nerd. My company specializes in cybersecurity consulting, which means businesses pay us obscene amounts of money to tell them their security sucks, and then fix it before some teenager in Romania steals all their customer data and posts it on the dark web. When I started Bennett Solutions 12 years ago, it was literally just me in a cramped apartment in Fremont, surviving on ramen and ambition, cold calling companies, and pitching my services like my life depended on it. Because it did. I had student loans the size of a mortgage, a laptop held together with duct tape and prayers, and exactly $700 in my bank account. But I also had something those rich kids with their trust funds and connections didn't have. I was hungry. Not metaphorically hungry, though there was plenty of that too. I mean genuinely willing to outwork everyone else, because failure wasn't an option when you came from a middle-class background where safety nets were made of hope and determination instead of family money. The business grew slowly at first, then exponentially once I landed a contract with a major healthcare provider who'd been hacked and needed someone to rebuild their entire infrastructure from scratch. That job led to referrals, which led to more contracts, which led to hiring actual employees instead of being a one-man show operating out of my living room. By the time I met Sophia, I had 15 employees, an actual office space, and enough money in the bank to feel like I'd made it. Here's the thing about finally having money after growing up without it. You don't really know how to handle it at first. You're generous to a fault because you remember what it felt like to stress about every dollar. You pick up checks because you can and because it feels good to be the provider, the dependable one, the guy who's got it covered. You don't think about boundaries or limits or the fact that some people will see your generosity as an ATM they can withdraw from whenever they feel like it. That was me. Marcus Bennett, the guy with the patience of a saint and the wallet of a small nation, as I so eloquently put it earlier. Though honestly, calling myself a small nation is probably underselling it. More like a medium-sized nation with robust GDP and a concerning trade deficit with the Lee family. Let me break down the financial devastation in numbers that would make my accountant, Derek. Shout out to Derek, the only person who's been consistently honest with me about this mess, have a panic attack. Over the course of my 10-year marriage to Sophia, I'd become the primary funding source for what I can only describe as the Lee Family Welfare Program. Zara's self-care retreats happened 4 times a year like clockwork. Miami in March, Tulum in June, Ibiza in September, and Bali in December because apparently, self-care is a full-time job that requires international travel and business class flights. Each trip averaged around $8,000 when you factored in the resort, the spa treatments, the restaurants where she'd order the most expensive thing on the menu and take exactly 3 bites for Instagram, and the shopping because you can't go to a new country without bringing back authentic local pieces that were probably made in the same Chinese factory as everything else. That's $32,000 a year just for Zara to take pictures of herself in designer swimwear. But wait, there's more. Because Zara also needed a new car every 2 years. Leased, naturally. Because why own something when you can have perpetual monthly payments? Which I co-signed for because her credit was apparently in the toilet from all those brand deals that never materialized into actual income. Add another $600 a month, or $7,200 annually, to the Zara tab. Then there were the random emergency requests that popped up with alarming frequency. Her laptop broke. $1,500 for a new MacBook Pro because she needed the processing power for her content creation, which consisted of phone selfies and 2-sentence captions. Her apartment needed new furniture. $4,000 at West Elm because IKEA wasn't on brand for her aesthetic. She needed a new camera for better quality photos. $3,000 for equipment she used exactly twice before deciding her iPhone was actually superior. Emergency dental work because she'd been putting off a root canal. $2,500 that I paid directly to the dentist because I knew if I gave her the cash it would somehow end up spent on a weekend in Vegas. Conservative estimate for Zara's annual financial drain? About $50,000. $50,000. For someone who was supposedly an independent adult with her own career and income stream. I could have bought a Tesla every year with what I spent on my sister-in-law's lifestyle maintenance. Now let's talk about Judith, the matriarch of this financial disaster. Her requests were somehow even more audacious because they came wrapped in this veneer of propriety and necessity that made them harder to refuse. She didn't ask for handouts. Oh no, that would be undignified. She asked for loans that we both knew would never be repaid, or she mentioned unfortunate circumstances that required immediate assistance, or she simply made statements about her needs that Sophia would then translate into requests on her behalf. The Great Refrigerator Incident of 2022 cost me $8,000. $8,000 for a refrigerator that could probably achieve sentience and solve world hunger. It had a screen, multiple temperature zones, a camera inside so you could see your food while grocery shopping, and a price tag that made me question my entire existence. When I suggested maybe she could just replace her existing fridge with a regular new model, Judith looked at me like I'd suggested she wear sweatpants to the opera. The roof situation was even better. $23,000 for a roof that didn't actually need replacing. But since we were already dealing with it, we might as well upgrade to architectural shingles and add solar panels, because property value and environmental consciousness and a dozen other justifications that boiled down to, I want it and Marcus will pay for it. The kicker? It was for a house that Sophia and I didn't even live in and would never inherit, because Judith had made it very clear that everything was going to Zara when she passed, since Sophia had married well and wouldn't need the help. There were property taxes when Judith forgot to pay them, $6,000. There was the new HVAC system because the old one was inefficient, $12,000. There was landscaping redesign because the yard needed to be modernized, $9,000 for plants and stones, and a Japanese-inspired water feature that looked like someone had watched too many Zen garden videos on YouTube. Every few months, something new would come up, some new expense that somehow became my responsibility. Judith's annual impact on my bank account? North of $60,000, easy. And unlike Zara, who at least had the decency to ask me directly, Judith worked through Sophia, which meant every request came with emotional manipulation baked in. Mom's really struggling, Sophia would say, about a woman who had a paid-off house, a Mercedes, and a wine collection worth more than most people's retirement funds. She's too proud to ask, but I know she needs help. And I, being the dutiful husband who didn't want to be the bad guy who refused to help his wife's family, would write another check. But the real money pit, the crown jewel of financial disasters, was Sophia's boutique. Bell and Briar. Yes, she named it something that sounded like a character from a fairy tale, because subtlety has never been the Lee family's strong suit. The initial investment was $120,000. Let me repeat that. $120,000 to open a retail store in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Seattle, in an era when everyone does their shopping online, to sell clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The breakdown went something like this. $40,000 for the lease deposit and first 3 months of rent in Capitol Hill, where retail space goes for about $8,000 a month, because apparently location is everything. $30,000 for interior design and renovations because the space needed to have the right energy and reflect the brand aesthetic, which meant exposed brick, minimalist clothing racks that looked like modern art installations, and a seating area with a velvet couch where exactly no one would ever sit. $25,000 for initial inventory from European designers whose names I couldn't pronounce and whose clothes looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd never actually seen a human body. $15,000 for the launch party that included champagne, catering, a live DJ, and gift bags for influencers that probably cost more than the gifts inside. And another $10,000 for the marketing campaign that included professional photography, social media advertising, and paying a PR firm to get mentions in local fashion blogs. That was just the startup cost. The ongoing expenses were their own special nightmare. Rent at $8,000 a month. 2 employees at $15 an hour each, because apparently Sophia couldn't actually be bothered to work her own store full-time. She needed to be available for creative direction and brand partnerships. Monthly inventory replenishment. Utilities. Insurance. Marketing. Website maintenance. Every month, that boutique needed cash flow, and every month it operated at a loss that I covered because Sophia insisted it just needed time to find its audience. In 2 years of operation, Bell and Briar had made a grand total of $83,000 in revenue and cost me over $300,000 when you added up everything. That's not a business. That's a very expensive hobby that I was apparently funding while watching my retirement plans evaporate into designer clothing and craft coffee for customers who never materialized in the numbers we needed. Here's the really fun part, though. My name wasn't on any of it. Not the business license, not the lease, not the bank accounts. Nothing. When I'd suggested being listed as a co-owner, since I was funding the entire operation, Sophia had gotten weird about it. Said it would complicate things with her brand identity, that investors and customers needed to see it as her vision, that having a man's name on the business would undermine her position as a female entrepreneur. And stupid, in love, doormat Marcus had said, "Sure, honey, whatever you think is best." So there you have it. The Bank of Marcus. Operating hours, 24/7, 365. Services offered, unlimited withdrawals, no questions asked, no repayment required. Customer satisfaction guaranteed or your dignity back. Except the dignity was non-refundable, and I'd lost that somewhere around year 3 of this arrangement. Every year, Derek would sit me down for our annual financial review, and every year his expression would get progressively more concerned. "Marcus," he'd say, pulling up spreadsheets that looked like crime scene evidence, "we need to talk about your family expenses." And every year I'd wave him off, make jokes about the cost of keeping the peace, and promise to set better boundaries that we both knew I wouldn't actually set. The worst part wasn't even the money, though watching hundreds of thousands of dollars disappear into the void of other people's wants was pretty devastating. The worst part was the lack of appreciation, the entitlement, the assumption that this was just how things were supposed to be. No thank yous, no acknowledgement, no recognition that maybe, just maybe, I was being taken advantage of. Just expectation followed by more expectation, an endless cycle of requests that I kept fulfilling because I didn't know how to say no without being the villain. Turning 40 felt like standing on the edge of something significant, you know? Not in that cliché midlife crisis way where guys suddenly buy Corvettes and start hitting the gym obsessively while listening to the same music they loved in high school. More like a threshold moment where you either accept who you've become or decide to do something about it. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to choose option 2 in the most spectacular way possible. I'd been planning this birthday party for months, which should have been my first clue that I was overcompensating for something. Normal people don't spend months planning their own birthday parties unless they're trying to prove a point, and boy, did I have a point to prove. 10 years of being called the budget husband, a decade of being treated like the help at family gatherings, countless dinner parties where I picked up the check while getting roasted for my quaint middle-class background. All of it was building to this moment where I'd finally show them I wasn't just some lucky schmuck who'd married above his station. The Azure Room wasn't just any restaurant. This place was Seattle royalty, the kind of establishment where tech billionaires took visiting investors and where marriage proposals came with a side of financial anxiety. Getting a reservation normally required booking 3 months in advance and possibly sacrificing your firstborn, but I'd rented the entire private dining hall for the evening, which meant I essentially had the run of the place. The manager, this sophisticated guy named Philippe who pronounced every syllable like it was a fine wine, had personally overseen every detail of my event planning. We're talking about the works here, people. A 7-piece string quartet positioned in the corner, playing everything from Vivaldi to modern covers of pop, and a custom menu designed by a chef who'd trained in Paris and had opinions about the proper way to sear scallops that he'd share whether you asked or not. The champagne alone was a whole thing. I'm talking Krug Classe d'Ambonne, which for those of you who aren't pretentious wine people, and I wasn't until I married into this family, is basically liquid gold that costs about $400 per bottle. I'd ordered 12 bottles because Philippe had assured me that discerning guests appreciate quality over quantity. What he meant was rich people drink expensive booze, and if I wanted to impress them, I needed to pony up. So I did. The whole evening was supposed to cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 when you added up the venue, food, drinks, entertainment, and all the little extras that Philippe kept suggesting with that smooth European accent that made everything sound necessary. Perhaps some caviar service for arrival? Sure, why not? The chef has prepared a special dessert presentation with gold leaf and French chocolate. Obviously, we could arrange for a private sommelier to pair wines with each course. Of course we could. Reggie, my best friend since college and the closest thing I had to a brother, thought I'd lost my damn mind. We'd met up for lunch about a week before the party at our usual spot, a dive bar near Pike Place Market where the bartender knew our orders and nobody cared if you showed up in jeans and a t-shirt. He'd listened to me describe all the planning, getting progressively more concerned with each detail. "Bro," he'd said, setting down his beer and giving me that lawyer look he uses when he thinks someone's making a terrible decision. "This is insane. You're dropping the GDP of a small country on a birthday party to impress people who already don't respect you. You see how that's backwards, right?" I'd laughed it off, ordered another round, and told him he didn't understand. "This isn't about impressing them," I'd insisted, which even I knew was a lie. "This is about celebrating a milestone with the people I care about. Marcus, my man, you're one of the smartest people I know when it comes to business. But when it comes to that family," he'd shaken his head, "you've got a PhD in being a doormat." He wasn't wrong, but I wasn't ready to hear it yet. Instead, I'd changed the subject and made him promise to give a toast at the party. Make it good, I told him. Something that'll make them see me differently. The night of the party, I'd gotten ready at home, standing in front of the mirror in that midnight blue Tom Ford suit that had cost more than some people's monthly salary. The fabric felt incredible, the fit was perfect, and looking at my reflection, I barely recognized myself. I looked successful, powerful, like someone who belonged in rooms with important people making important decisions. It was exactly the image I'd been trying to project for years. Sophia had come up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist and smiling at our reflection. "You look amazing," she'd said, and for a moment, I'd let myself believe that maybe she was proud of me, that maybe tonight would be different, that maybe her family would finally see what she saw, assuming she actually saw anything beyond my bank account. "Think your mom will be impressed?" I'd asked, half joking but also desperately serious. She'd kissed my cheek, leaving a lipstick mark I'd had to wipe off. "She'll come around eventually. You know how she is." Yeah, I knew exactly how she was. That was the problem. I'd arrived at the Azure room early, obsessively checking every detail like a general inspecting troops before battle. The flowers were perfect. The music was elegant. The champagne was chilling at exactly the right temperature. Philippe had assured me that everything was impeccable and that my guest would be thoroughly impressed. I'd tipped him an extra $500 just for the confidence boost. My friends started arriving around 6:30, people from work, old college buddies who'd flown in from out of state, my business partner David, who'd helped me build Bennett Solutions from the ground up. They brought thoughtful gifts, offered genuine congratulations, and seemed actually happy to be there celebrating with me. We laughed, shared stories, caught up on life. For those first 30 minutes before the Lee family arrived, I actually enjoyed my own party. Reggie had pulled me aside at one point, handing me a scotch and raising his glass. "Tonight's gonna be epic," he'd said with that grin that usually meant he was about to say something wildly inappropriate. "This is your night, man. 40 years of being awesome, and everyone here knows it. Everyone except the people who matter most to my wife," I'd muttered into my drink. "Then maybe," Reggie had said carefully, "the people who matter most to your wife are the wrong people." I'd laughed it off then, but those words would echo in my head later that night, after the cranberry juice incident, after the humiliation, after everything fell apart in exactly the way I should have predicted if I'd been paying attention to the patterns instead of desperately hoping they'd change. But standing there at 6:45, drink in hand, surrounded by people who actually gave a damn about me, I'd felt optimistic. Foolish, naive, stupid optimistic. This was going to be the night everything changed, I told myself. The night I finally earned their respect. Turns out I was half right. Everything was definitely going to change. Just not in the way I'd imagined. 7 o'clock came and went. Then 7:15, 7:20, 7:30. Each time the door opened, I'd look up expecting to see Sophia and her family. And each time it was just more of my actual friends arriving on time, like civilized human beings who understood basic social contracts. Philippe kept glancing at me with this sympathetic expression that made me want to crawl under the ornate serving table and hide from the growing embarrassment of being stood up at my own damn birthday party. My business partner David sidled up next to me around 7:25, champagne in hand, and whispered, "Should we be worried? Did something happen?" The concern in his voice was genuine, which somehow made it worse. He actually thought there might be an emergency. Some legitimate reason why my wife and her family were nearly an hour late to an event that had been planned for months and confirmed repeatedly. "Oh, they're fine," I'd said with a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. Judith probably needed extra time for her makeup, or Zara was having a wardrobe crisis. You know how it is. Except I did know how it was, and it had nothing to do with emergencies and everything to do with power dynamics I was only beginning to understand. Being late wasn't an accident for the Lee family. It was a statement, a way of establishing hierarchy, of making it clear that their time was more valuable than everyone else's, that the party couldn't really start until they arrived because they were the main event. I'd seen Judith do it at weddings, at charity galas, at casual dinner parties where she'd show up fashionably late and expect everyone to fawn over her entrance like she was royalty, gracing the peasants with her presence. At 7:35, the door finally opened with this theatrical flourish, And then they came like they were walking a red carpet at the Oscars instead of arriving inexcusably late to a private party. Judith led the procession wearing some designer number that probably cost more than the average person's car payment, all flowing fabric and strategic draping that screamed, "I have money and opinions about your life choices." Her hair was styled within an inch of its life, every strand precisely placed, her makeup flawless in that way that takes professional help and probably 3 different ring lights. Behind her came Zara, and I swear to God this woman was wearing sunglasses. Inside, at 7:30 at night, in Seattle, in October, when it had been dark outside for over an hour, she had her phone out, naturally, recording her entrance for what I can only assume was incredibly riveting content for her followers who definitely cared deeply about her arrival at her brother-in-law's birthday party. She was doing that influencer walk where every step looks choreographed, pausing every few feet to get different angles, completely oblivious to the fact that everyone was staring at her not because she looked amazing, but because she looked absolutely ridiculous. And then there was Sophia, my wife, my partner, the woman who'd promised to be by my side through everything. She looked stunning in a velvet dress that hugged every curve, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, makeup perfect, jewelry glinting in the chandelier light. She looked like $1,000,000, which was ironic considering I'd probably spent that much on her over the years. But what struck me wasn't how beautiful she looked. It was the expression on her face. Pride. She was proud of this entrance, proud of making everyone wait, proud of the disruption they were causing. Not a single apology as they approached. No sorry we're late, or traffic was terrible, or even a polite acknowledgement that they'd kept 40 people waiting for over an hour. Instead, Judith waved her hand in this dismissive gesture that somehow managed to convey both greeting and condescension simultaneously. "Marcus, darling." She called out loud enough for everyone to hear. We made it. Traffic was absolutely dreadful, and Zara's lashes needed extra glue. You understand. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. An expectation that of course I'd understand. That their beauty routine and questionable time management took precedence over basic respect for me or the 40 other people who'd managed to arrive on time. The fact that they lived 20 minutes away and traffic in Seattle at 7 p.m. on a Saturday evening was actually pretty light didn't seem to factor into this narrative. I could feel David tense beside me, could see Reggie across the room physically restraining himself from saying something that would definitely make things worse. My college friend Jenny actually mouthed, "Are you kidding me?" from her table. But I just smiled, because that's what I always did. I smiled and played along and pretended this was all perfectly normal behavior. "Of course," I said smoothly, walking over to greet them with all the grace of a man who'd had 10 years of practice swallowing his dignity. Priorities before punctuality. After all, what's a birthday party without properly glued lashes? The sarcasm in my voice was subtle enough that Judith and Zara missed it completely, but I saw Sophia's eyes narrow slightly. She knew. She always knew when I was being passive-aggressive, and usually she'd shoot me a warning look that said, "Behave yourself." But tonight she just smiled, like my sarcasm was cute instead of a symptom of a much bigger problem. The waiter who'd been standing nearby turned away quickly, and I swear I saw his shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. At least someone appreciated my commentary. Philippe appeared with champagne flutes on a silver tray, ever the professional, though I caught him exchanging a glance with another staff member that clearly communicated rich people are the worst. They settled into the seats I'd reserved at the head table. The best seats in the house, naturally, with the perfect view of the string quartet and the rest of the room. Judith immediately started rearranging the place settings because apparently, the professional event coordinator hadn't positioned the silverware to her exact specifications. Zara was still filming, panning across the room with commentary I couldn't quite hear, but could definitely imagine. "So we're at Marcus's birthday thing, and oh my God, look at these centerpieces, they're actually kind of cute for a birthday party, very unexpected." Sophia caught my eye and smiled, and for just a second I saw something there. Maybe guilt, maybe acknowledgement that her family was being ridiculous, maybe just a plea for me to keep playing along like I always did. I smiled back, because what else was I going to do? Make a scene at my own birthday party? Tell them all to leave? I'd spent $40,000 on this evening, and I was going to endure it with grace even if it killed me. The rest of my guests had gone back to their conversations, the awkward pause of the Lee family's entrance fading into the background music and general party ambience. But I could see the looks, the raised eyebrows, the whispered comments. My friends weren't stupid. They could see exactly what was happening, could see the dynamic playing out in real time. David gave me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder as he walked past to refill his drink. Jenny shot me a look that clearly said, "We're talking about this later." And Reggie, bless his confrontational heart, was staring daggers at Judith with the intensity of a lawyer preparing to destroy a witness on the stand. Philippe appeared at my elbow, ever professional. "Shall we begin service now that all your guests have arrived?" The subtle emphasis on all was the closest thing to editorial commentary he'd allow himself, and I appreciated it more than he could know. "Yes, please," I said, finishing my champagne in one long swallow. "Let's get this party started." What I didn't know then, standing there with my forced smile and my expensive suit and my desperate need for validation, was that the party was about to get started in ways I couldn't possibly imagine. The entrance was just the opening act. The real performance was yet to come, and it would involve cranberry juice, public humiliation, and the final straw that would break this particular camel's back. But for now, I just smiled and played the gracious host, because that's what I always did. Dinner service began with all the precision and elegance you'd expect from a restaurant that charges more for an appetizer than most people spend on groceries for a week. Philippe's staff moved through the room like synchronized dancers, presenting each course with theatrical flair and descriptions that made simple food sound like edible poetry. Pan-seared scallops with a saffron-infused beurre blanc, microgreens from our rooftop garden, and a delicate citrus foam. Translation: expensive shellfish with butter sauce and some leaves. My friends were genuinely enjoying themselves, complimenting the food, engaging in actual conversations that didn't revolve around who was wearing what brand or which influencer was currently getting canceled on Twitter. David and his wife were trading stories with Jenny about their kids' college applications. Reggie was charming a table of my business associates with some hilarious courtroom anecdote involving a client who tried to represent himself and accidentally confessed to 3 additional crimes. It was exactly the kind of party I'd hoped for: warm, genuine, celebratory. And then there was the Lee family table. Judith had sent back her first course twice because the scallops weren't quite right. First too warm, then too cold, like she was Goldilocks but with shellfish and an attitude problem. Zara had taken approximately 47 photos of her plate from different angles before taking exactly 3 bites and declaring herself full. She was now scrolling through her phone, occasionally showing something to Sophia, who'd laugh in that fake way people do when they're not really paying attention but want to seem engaged. Sophia herself had barely touched her food, too busy holding court at their table, talking loudly enough that nearby tables kept glancing over. She was telling some story about a difficult client at her boutique, which was rich considering the boutique had maybe 5 customers a week, gesturing dramatically with her wine glass and making Judith and Zara laugh at what I'm sure were extremely witty observations about other people's fashion choices. It was between the 3rd and 4th courses, during that perfect lull when everyone had enough wine in them to be relaxed but not drunk, when Philippe had dimmed the lights slightly and the string quartet shifted to something softer, that Reggie stood up with his glass raised. The room quieted down, people turning their attention to him with genuine interest because Reggie was known for giving legendary toasts, funny, heartfelt, the kind that made you laugh and tear up simultaneously. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his lawyer voice carrying across the room with practiced ease, "I've known Marcus Bennett for over 20 years. We met in college when we were both broke, stupid, and convinced we were going to change the world." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Marcus was the guy who'd share his last cup of ramen with you, who'd stay up all night helping you study even when he had his own exam the next day, who'd loan you his only decent shirt for a job interview, and then wear a wrinkled mess to his own interview the next day. I could feel myself getting emotional, which was ridiculous because I'm a 40-year-old man at my own birthday party, but Reggie had this way of cutting through all the pretense and getting to the heart of things. Over the years, I've watched Marcus build an incredible business from absolutely nothing. I've watched him help friends, support causes he believes in, and remain one of the most genuinely good people I know despite having every reason to become cynical. He paused, looking directly at me with this expression that was part pride, part concern. Marcus Bennett is proof that good guys don't finish last. They just buy the restaurant. The room erupted in laughter and applause. People were clinking glasses, raising them in my direction, calling out agreements and well wishes. It was perfect. It was exactly what I needed to hear. For one shining moment, I felt truly seen and appreciated. And then Judith decided to contribute. She raised her glass with all the enthusiasm of someone being forced to acknowledge a parking meter, that tight smile on her face that I'd come to recognize as her performing graciousness expression. The room quieted again, everyone politely waiting to hear what the mother-in-law would say. Please, I thought desperately, just this once say something nice. Just once acknowledge that I'm not completely worthless. To Marcus, she began, her voice carrying that particular tone that rich people use when they're pretending to be humble. Our dependable man who's always. She paused, and I swear that pause contained every ounce of condescension she'd cultivated over 60 years of looking down on people she considered beneath her. Around. Not there for us. Not supportive. Not wonderful or generous, or any of the adjectives you might use for someone who'd been financially supporting your family for a decade. Just around. Like I was a piece of furniture. A lamp that happened to be present. The houseplant nobody noticed until it needed watering. The silence that followed was deafening. My friends looked uncomfortable, exchanging glances that clearly communicated, did she really just say that? David's wife actually gasped quietly. Jenny's mouth fell open. Even Philippe, the consummate professional, looked momentarily shocked. But Zara? Oh, Zara wasn't about to let that moment pass without adding her own special touch. She giggled, actually giggled like a middle schooler who just heard someone swear, and added loudly enough for everyone to hear. And always paying. The Lee table erupted in laughter. Judith threw her head back, like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. Sophia was laughing too. That genuine laugh she usually reserved for actually funny things, not public humiliation of her husband. They were having a moment, the three of them, bonding over their shared joke at my expense while 40 of my friends and colleagues sat there witnessing my wife's family treat me like a punchline. I felt David tense beside me. Saw Reggie's face go from shock to furious in about half a second. Heard Jenny mutter, "Oh hell no," under her breath. The string quartet had stopped playing. The musicians looking at each other uncertainly like they weren't sure if they should resume or if someone was about to flip a table. And me? I just sat there, that same smile frozen on my face, holding my champagne glass like it was a life preserver. Because what else was I supposed to do? Make a scene? Tell my mother-in-law and sister-in-law exactly what I thought of them in front of everyone? Divorce my wife right there between courses 3 and 4? So I laughed. Not a real laugh. I'd forgotten what those felt like around the Lee family, but a performance of a laugh that said, I'm in on the joke. This doesn't bother me. We're all just having fun here. I raised my glass and said, to being dependable and financially responsible, someone's got to keep this family solvent. A few people laughed, but it was that uncomfortable laughter that happens when someone makes a joke that's a little too close to a cry for help. Reggie wasn't laughing at all. He was staring at Sophia with an expression that clearly communicated he was mentally drafting divorce papers on my behalf. The servers, bless them, chose that moment to bring out the next course, creating a distraction that allowed the conversation to shift, the tension to dissipate slightly, the party to limp forward into its next phase. But something had shifted. My friends had seen it, really seen it. The dynamic, the disrespect, the casual cruelty disguised as family banter. There was no unseeing it now. Sophia leaned over to me as the servers placed our plates, touching my arm in what I'm sure she thought was an affectionate gesture. You okay, baby? You know they're just joking around. Don't be so sensitive. Don't be so sensitive. For words that had become the chorus of our marriage. The refrain she sang every time her family crossed a line. Don't be so sensitive when they mock your background. Don't be so sensitive when they treat you like the help. Don't be so sensitive when they publicly humiliate you at your own birthday party. I looked at her, really looked at her, and something in my chest went cold and quiet. I'm fine, I said flatly. Perfectly fine. She smiled, satisfied, and turned back to her mother and sister who were already whispering about something else, probably planning their next bon mot. And I sat there, fork in hand, staring at a plate of food I could no longer taste, calculating exactly how much this evening of humiliation had cost me per insult. Dessert arrived with all the theatrical pageantry Philippe could muster, probably sensing that this party needed all the distraction it could get. The lights dimmed to almost darkness, and then the servers emerged from the kitchen carrying this elaborate chocolate sculpture that looked more like modern art than something you were supposed to eat. It was 3 tiers of dark chocolate architectural madness with Happy 40th Marcus written across the base in actual gold leaf, surrounded by what I'm pretty sure were edible flowers that cost more per petal than most bouquets. The room erupted in appreciative gasps and applause. Someone started singing Happy Birthday, and everyone joined in, even the string quartet, who somehow made it sound elegant instead of awkward. For a moment, watching 40 people sing to me with genuine warmth, I felt that flutter of hope again. That stupid, persistent hope that maybe the evening could still be salvaged, that maybe this would be the memory I'd keep instead of all the cringeworthy moments that had come before. But then I caught Zara leaning over to Sophia, whispering something with this wicked little smirk plastered across her face. Sophia's eyes lit up in that way they did when she and her sister were plotting something they found hilarious and everyone else would find horrifying. They were giggling like teenagers planning a prank, and I felt my stomach drop because I knew. I just knew that whatever they were planning, I was the target. Zara reached for her cranberry mocktail. She'd been nursing the same glass all evening because apparently she was on some cleanse that prohibited alcohol but allowed designer drugs at music festivals, because priorities. The glass was still nearly full, that deep red liquid catching the light from the chandeliers, and I watched in what felt like slow motion as she picked it up with deliberate care. Our eyes met across the table. She smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not even a mischievous smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting all evening for this moment, who'd probably been planning it since the invitations went out, who was about to do something spectacular and knew there wouldn't be consequences because there never were consequences for Zara. Time did that weird thing where it speeds up and slows down simultaneously. I saw her hand tilt, saw the liquid begin to move, saw Judith's eyes widen slightly, not in horror or an attempt to stop it, but in anticipation. Saw Sophia cover her mouth, but not to gasp, to hide her smile. And then I felt it. Cold. So incredibly cold. The cranberry juice hit my chest like a shock, spreading across that midnight blue Tom Ford fabric in an expanding stain that looked like someone had shot me with a fruit-flavored weapon. The liquid soaked through immediately, seeping through my shirt to my skin, dripping down onto my pants, my Italian leather shoes, pooling on the floor around my chair. The entire room went silent. And I mean silent. The kind of silence where you could hear individual heartbeats and the slight creak of someone shifting in their chair. The string quartet stopped mid-note. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the servers froze in place like someone had hit pause on reality. Zara's voice cut through the silence like a knife. Now you look as cheap as you really are. Judith clapped. Actually clapped her hands together in delight like her daughter had just performed a perfect piano recital instead of assaulting her son-in-law with a beverage. The sound echoed through the silent room, sharp and mocking. And Sophia? My wife. My partner? The woman I'd pledged my life to? She was beaming with pride, looking at her sister with such admiration you'd think Zara had just cured cancer instead of publicly humiliating her husband on his 40th birthday. I could hear Reggie pushing back his chair, his voice starting to form words that were probably going to include several variations of profanity and legal threats. Could see David and Jenny and half my other friends preparing to either intervene or join in the confrontation. Could feel the entire room holding its breath, waiting to see how this would play out, whether this would turn into the kind of scene that people would talk about for years. But here's the thing about reaching your breaking point. Sometimes it doesn't look like an explosion. Sometimes it looks like the calmest you've ever been. Sometimes clarity hits you like ice water, and suddenly you're not angry or hurt or embarrassed. You're just done. Completely, utterly, irrevocably done. I picked up my napkin with careful precision, dabbed at the spreading stain on my chest like I was blotting up a minor spill instead of cleaning up evidence of assault. Looked directly at Zara with the calmest expression I'd ever worn and said, "You know, most people just buy cards." The laugh I got from my side of the room was genuine, relieved, the kind of laughter that happens when someone defuses tension with humor instead of violence. But I wasn't joking. Or rather, I was joking, but there was steel underneath it that I don't think anyone quite caught in that moment. I stood up, still smiling, cranberry juice dripping from my suit jacket onto the imported Italian linen tablecloth that probably cost more to clean than replace. "If you'll excuse me for just a moment," I said to the room at large, my voice perfectly pleasant, perfectly controlled. "I need to visit the restroom and assess the damage." Philippe appeared at my elbow immediately, his professional composure cracked just enough that I could see genuine concern. "Mr. Bennett, I am so terribly sorry. Please let me." I held up a hand, still smiling that eerie calm smile. "Not your fault, Philippe. Family dynamics, you know how it is." I pulled out my wallet and handed him $500 bills. "For the staff. They've been exceptional tonight, and they shouldn't suffer because my in-laws have the collective maturity of a middle school cafeteria table." His eyes widened at the tip. It was more than generous, bordering on excessive, but he pocketed it with a subtle nod. "The security cameras in this room are always recording," he said quietly, meeting my eyes with an expression that communicated more than his words. "For liability purposes, you understand. The footage is kept for 90 days. I smiled wider. How fortunate. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. $5,000 worth of custom tailoring ruined by cranberry juice and spite. My shirt was destroyed. My jacket probably salvageable, but never quite the same. But looking at myself, at the red stain spreading across my chest like a target, I felt something shift inside me that had nothing to do with the clothes. This was it. This was the moment I'd look back on and recognize as the turning point. Not just of the evening, but of my entire relationship with this family, with Sophia, with the version of myself who'd spent a decade accepting unacceptable behavior because I was too desperate for approval to demand respect. I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls. The first to my lawyer, Paul, who'd been telling me for years that I needed better financial protection in my marriage. It went to voicemail because it was Saturday night and normal people weren't working, but I left a message. "Paul, it's Marcus. I need to meet Monday morning first thing. It's time we had that conversation about asset protection and separate finances. I'll explain everything then." The second call was to my financial advisor, Derek, who also didn't answer, but whose voicemail got a similar message. "Derek, Marcus, Monday morning. I need a complete audit of every account, every card, every financial connection to my wife's family. Time to close some doors." The third call was to my assistant, Monica, who actually answered because she was terrifyingly efficient and apparently never slept. "Marcus, is everything okay? Isn't tonight your party?" "It was," I said calmly. "Monica, I need you to pull together some documentation for me. Every receipt, every transfer, every loan or gift to my wife's family for the past 10 years. Everything. Can you have that ready by Monday?" There was a pause, and then Monica's voice came back sharp and focused. "Oh, we're finally doing this. About damn time. I'll have everything organized and categorized by Sunday evening." I hung up and looked at myself in the mirror one more time. The old Marcus would have gone back out there, laughed it off, paid the bill, and driven everyone home while they made jokes about his cranberry situation. He would have gotten the suit cleaned, replaced it if necessary, and moved on like nothing had happened because that's what doormats do. They absorb the mess and ask for more. But the new Marcus? The one staring back at me with cranberry juice drying on his chest and steel in his eyes? He had other plans. Because here's what none of them knew, what none of them had bothered to find out because they'd never seen me as anything more than a wallet with legs. I was actually good at my job. Really good. And part of being good at cybersecurity and business consulting meant understanding systems, finding vulnerabilities, and knowing exactly how to shut things down when necessary. Sophia's boutique? Running on accounts I controlled. The credit cards I'd given to Judith and Zara? All linked to my primary account with me as the sole authorized user. The house we lived in my name only because I'd bought it before we got married and Sophia had never pushed to be added to the deed. Our joint account had exactly enough for household expenses, while my business accounts, the real money, were completely separate and protected. I'd never thought of it as protection before. Just seemed like smart financial management, keeping business and personal finances separate, maintaining control over my company's assets. But now I realized I'd accidentally built the perfect foundation for exactly what needed to happen next. I went back out to the party with my ruined suit and my new resolve, smiled through the rest of the evening like nothing had fundamentally shifted in my entire worldview, and even gave a gracious speech thanking everyone for coming. Sophia tried to brush off the incident on the drive home, laughing nervously and saying, "You know how they are, Marcus. Don't be so dramatic about it. It was just a joke." I said nothing, just smiled and poured myself a glass of wine when we got home. That expensive Cabernet she'd insisted we buy from some boutique vineyard that cost $200 a bottle. "Of course, dear," I said smoothly. "Wouldn't want to ruin their fun." She looked at me strangely then, like she'd heard something in my voice she didn't recognize. But the moment passed, and she went upstairs to bed. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, going through files and accounts, making lists, preparing. By Sunday afternoon, Monica had sent over a comprehensive spreadsheet that made my jaw drop even though I'd been the one funding everything. Seeing it all laid out in black and white, $547,000 over 10 years, was something else entirely. Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp, I was in Paul's office. By 9, I was at the bank. By 10, every single card connected to my accounts had been canceled. Credit cards, debit cards, the store cards I'd co-signed for, everything. One by one, I watched the bank representative click through screens, terminating access with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before and understood exactly what was happening. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Bennett?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "This is quite extensive. I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. The fallout was spectacular. By Monday afternoon, my phone started blowing up. First text from Zara at 2:47 p.m. My card isn't working? Sephora just declined it, and I'm literally standing at the register. This is so embarrassing." Then Judith at 3:15 p.m. "Marcus, there seems to be some issue with my account. The property management company says my rent payment bounced. Can you please look into this immediately?" Sophia at 3:52 p.m. "What's going on? Mom is freaking out and Zara is having a meltdown. Did you forget to pay something?" I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I had Monica email them all a carefully worded message with attached documentation, a spreadsheet detailing every single expense I'd covered over the past decade, itemized and categorized with dates and amounts. The email was polite, professional, and absolutely devastating. "Dear family, after reviewing our household finances, I've decided to implement some necessary changes. Effective immediately, all supplementary accounts and credit cards have been closed. This decision comes after careful consideration of our financial future and sustainability. For your reference, I've attached a comprehensive overview of expenses covered over the past 10 years. Please note that these were gifts freely given and are not requests for repayment. However, going forward, I will be unable to continue this level of financial support. I'm sure you understand that at 40, it's time for me to focus on my own financial security and retirement planning. I have complete faith that each of you, as capable adults, will find your own paths to financial independence. Best regards, Marcus." The group chat exploded within minutes. My phone literally wouldn't stop buzzing. The messages ranged from confused to angry to outright hostile. Zara sent me 17 texts in a row, escalating from "this must be a mistake" to "you can't just do this" to "Sophia needs to divorce you immediately." Judith left a voicemail that was 2 full minutes of barely controlled rage disguised as concern, saying things like, "How could you embarrass us this way? And what will people think? And we're family, Marcus." But Sophia's reaction was the one that mattered. She came home from the boutique at 6 p.m., walked into my home office where I was calmly working on a client proposal, and stood in the doorway with her phone in her hand and fury in her eyes. "What the hell did you do?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "My mom's landlord is threatening eviction. Zara's car payment bounced, and my boutique supplier account was declined this morning. Marcus, what is happening?" I looked up from my laptop, adjusted my glasses, and gave her the same calm smile I'd been practicing since Saturday night. "I'm treating you like a partner, darling. A silent partner. You said I should, remember? You wanted the business to be independent. Well, congratulations, it's independent now." "This isn't funny." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "It's not funny at all. Kind of like having cranberry juice dumped on you at your own birthday party while your wife watches with pride. That wasn't particularly funny either." Her face went pale. "So this is about Saturday?" "Marcus, I told you, they were just joking, I know. You've said that a lot over the years. I closed my laptop and stood up. Here's the thing, Sophia. I spent 10 years being the punchline to your family's jokes and the solution to their financial problems. I'm done with both roles. Your boutique is yours. Figure it out. Your mother's rent is her problem. Your sister's lifestyle maintenance is not my responsibility. You can't just cut us off. Actually, I said, pulling out the folder Paul had prepared, I can. Every card was in my name. Every account was mine. I was generous, perhaps too generous, but that was my choice. And now I'm making a different choice. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. I don't even know who you are right now. Funny, I said. I was thinking the same thing about you on Saturday night, when you laughed while your sister humiliated me. For once in our marriage, Sophia had no comeback. The next few weeks were absolutely glorious in the most petty, satisfying way imaginable. I didn't have to do anything except exist and watch karma work its magic through the grapevine of mutual friends and social media. Turns out when you cut off someone's unlimited funding, they have to face something they've spent years avoiding: reality. Reggie became my primary source of intel, mostly because he was friends with some of Zara's former influencer circle who were more than happy to share the tea. Apparently, Zara had posted a long, rambling Instagram story about toxic family members who abandon you in your time of need, with a black and white photo of herself looking pensively out a window. The comments were not sympathetic. Several people pointed out that maybe getting a job would help with her financial situation, which sent her into another spiral of stories about misunderstood creative entrepreneurs. But here's where it gets better. She actually had to get a real job, not a brand partnership or a collaboration. An actual show up and work for hourly wages job. Through the grapevine, I heard she was waitressing at some trendy brunch place in Capitol Hill. Naturally, she tried to spin it on social media as experiencing life from different perspectives for content and connecting with the service industry for authenticity. Her followers weren't buying it, especially when someone posted a screenshot of her earlier stories complaining about waitstaff at restaurants. The Instagram posts from her first week were comedy gold. Pictures of her feet with captions like, "Who knew standing for 8 hours was this hard?" Hashtag real life, hashtag hustle mode, hashtag server life. Videos of her learning to use the POS system with guys. Technology is so complicated when you're in the trenches. Hashtag respect. She lasted exactly 2.5 weeks before posting about how the environment wasn't aligned with her personal growth journey, and she needed to focus on her brand. Translation: someone asked her to actually work instead of taking selfies in the walk-in cooler. Judith's situation was equally entertaining. The wine cooler, that $8,000 monstrosity that could probably achieve consciousness, appeared on Facebook Marketplace with the description, "Luxury wine storage, barely used, minor scratches." She was asking $7,500 for something she'd begged me to buy 6 months ago. Last I checked through my fake account I created specifically for stalking purposes, she dropped the price 3 times and was now at $4,000 with "must sell ASAP" in all caps. Her house, that colonial monument to excess in Bellevue, suddenly had a "for rent" sign in the yard. She'd moved to a condo in Renton, still nice, but definitely a downgrade from the neighborhood where she used to hold court like suburban royalty. The best part? I heard through David's wife, who ran in similar social circles, that Judith had been telling people she chose to downsize for environmental reasons and was embracing minimalism. Sure, January. Nothing says environmental consciousness like being forced to sell your stuff because your cash cow finally grew a spine. But Sophia's struggle was the one that hit different. The boutique, Bell and Briar, limped along for about 6 weeks after I cut funding. She tried everything: sales, Instagram promotions, reaching out to every contact she had. Turns out when your entire business model depends on someone else's money and you've spent years building a brand instead of building actual business acumen, things fall apart pretty quickly. The supplier started calling me directly since my name was on all the original contracts. I politely informed them that I was no longer associated with the business, and they should contact the owner, Miss Sophia Lee. The look on her face when she came home and told me the Italian leather goods company wanted their payment or they'd sue was priceless. "They said you set up the account," she'd said, her voice small in a way I'd never heard before. "That you personally guaranteed payment." "I did," I confirmed. "And then I sent them documentation terminating my involvement and removing my guarantee. Ball's in your court now, partner." She'd stared at me like I was a stranger. When did you become so cold? I'm not cold, Sophia. I'm just done being warm to people who treat me like an ATM with a pulse. I'd gone back to my laptop, effectively ending the conversation. Your business, your problem. Isn't that what independence means? By week 8, Bell and Breyer had a store closing sale sign in the window. Everything must go, 50 to 70% off. I drove by once, just to see it, and found myself feeling absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no regret. Just the quiet certainty that I'd made the right choice. The final update came from Monica, who'd been monitoring social media and news outlets like the thorough professional she was. Zara had pivoted to promoting some multi-level marketing scheme, essential oils or supplements, or whatever pyramid scheme was currently trending. Judith had gotten a part-time job as a receptionist at a dental office, which apparently was just to stay busy and give back to the community. And Sophia had taken a job as a sales associate at Nordstrom, folding clothes and working commission, trying to rebuild enough money to figure out what came next. When Sophia confronted me about the divorce papers, because of course I'd filed, why would I stay in a marriage that had been a business transaction disguised as a partnership? She'd asked me if I felt good about destroying her family. I'd looked at her, really looked at her, and felt that same calm that had settled over me the night of my birthday. I didn't destroy anything, Sophia. I just stopped building it for you. There's a difference. You're really going to throw away 10 years. No, I'd said quietly. You threw it away the night you laughed while your sister humiliated me. I'm just acknowledging what's been true for a while now. We were never actually partners. I was a resource you married, and you all finally drained the well dry. She'd left without another word. The papers were signed within a month. 1 year later, I stood in my new apartment in Ballard. A sleek 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, getting ready for my 41st birthday party. And by party, I mean an actual party with people who genuinely liked me, not a performance designed to prove my worth to people who'd already decided I had none. The difference was night and day, and I felt it in every cell of my body. The apartment was mine, just mine, with furniture I'd picked out myself instead of letting someone else dictate my taste. Turns out I actually like comfortable couches and art that means something to me instead of pieces chosen purely because they photograph well. I had books on the shelves that I'd actually read, not coffee table decorations that existed solely to signal sophistication to visitors. The place felt like home in a way my old house never had, despite being a fraction of the size and probably a tenth of the pretentiousness. I looked at myself in the mirror, adjusting the collar of my shirt. A simple button-down from J.Crew that cost maybe $60 and fit me perfectly. No Tom Ford, no designer labels, no desperate need to prove anything through my wardrobe choices. Just a decent shirt that looked good and didn't require a second mortgage. My therapist, Dr. Chun. Yeah, I got a therapist after the divorce because apparently realizing you've wasted a decade of your life with people who didn't value you requires some professional unpacking. Would have been proud of how far I'd come in the self-worth department. You know you don't need to prove anything to anyone, right? She'd asked during one of our sessions a few months back. Not to them, not to yourself. You're enough just as you are. It had taken me 40 years to start believing that, but better late than never, right? The doorbell rang at exactly 7 p.m. because my real friends actually showed up on time like functional adults. And I opened it to find Reggie standing there with a 6-pack of craft beer and the biggest grin I'd seen in months. Birthday boy, ready to celebrate being officially divorced and significantly wealthier without the Lee family dragging you down. You know it, I said, pulling him in for a hug. Come on in. Fair warning though, we have actual food instead of molecular gastronomy, and the beer is cold but not imported from a specific region of Belgium. Thank God, Reggie laughed, heading straight for the kitchen. Last year's party was beautiful, but I'm pretty sure I spent the whole night hungry because I didn't understand what I was eating. Over the next hour, people trickled in. David and his wife, Jenny and her partner, a bunch of colleagues from work, Monica, who'd become a genuine friend after helping me document my financial independence, and even Derek, my accountant, who showed up with champagne and a card that said, "Congratulations on your improved financial outlook." Inside he'd written, "Best investment you ever made was divesting from that family. Your portfolio thanks you." And then there was Eva. Eva Martinez, an architect I'd met at a coffee shop 3 months ago when we'd both reached for the last blueberry muffin at the same time and ended up splitting it while talking for 2 hours straight. She was smart, funny, had her own thriving business designing sustainable housing, and most importantly, she paid for her own coffee. That sounds like a low bar, and maybe it is, but after a decade with the Lee family, a woman who insisted on splitting the check felt revolutionary. She arrived carrying a small wrapped box and wearing jeans and a sweater that probably cost less than Sophia used to spend on a single shoe. And she looked absolutely beautiful in that effortless way that comes from actual confidence instead of designer labels. "Happy birthday, Marcus," she said, kissing my cheek. "Hope you're ready for terrible karaoke later because Reggie promised me you do an excellent Bon Jovi impression when sufficiently intoxicated." "Reggie's a liar, and I'm suing him for defamation," I called out, making her laugh as I pulled her inside and introduced her to everyone. The party was everything last year's wasn't. We ate pizza from the local place down the street that made pies so good they'd been featured in the Seattle Times. We drank beer and wine that tasted good without requiring a sommelier to explain why. We played board games and told embarrassing stories and laughed until our sides hurt. Nobody showed up late to make a statement. Nobody insulted me disguised as humor. Nobody expected me to fund their lifestyle or tolerate disrespect in exchange for the privilege of their company. Around 10 p.m., Reggie stood up with his beer raised, and the room quieted down naturally, everyone turning their attention to him with genuine interest and affection. All right, speech time. I know, you all love when I talk." Laughter rippled through the group. Last year, I gave a toast about Marcus being one of the best people I know. And then I had to watch his ex-family treat him like garbage at his own party. That sucked. A lot. I felt Eva squeeze my hand. A simple gesture of support that made my chest feel warm in a way I'd forgotten was possible. But this year, Reggie continued, his voice getting more serious. "This year I get to toast to Marcus doing what he should have done years ago, recognizing his own worth and refusing to accept anything less than respect. This man right here rebuilt his entire life, cut out toxic people who didn't deserve him, and came out the other side happier, healthier, and rocking a seriously nice apartment with a view that makes me want to quit law and pursue architecture just so I can justify spending this much on rent." More laughter, and Eva leaned over and whispered, "The rent's not that high. He's just dramatic," which made me smile. To Marcus, Reggie raised his glass higher, who proved that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living well and refusing to fund anyone else's dysfunction. "Happy 41st, my man. This year is going to be your year." Everyone cheered and clinked glasses, and I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. No anxiety about whether I was doing enough or being enough or spending enough. Just the simple joy of being surrounded by people who actually liked me for me, not for what I could provide them. Later, after most people had left and it was just me, Eva, Reggie, and a couple of other close friends lounging on my comfortable, non-performative furniture, my phone buzzed with a text. I almost ignored it. I'd gotten good at that over the past year, at not being constantly available to everyone else's needs and demands. But something made me check it. It was from Sophia. "Happy birthday, Marcus. Hope you're doing well." I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering hurt. Just the distant recognition that this message came from someone who used to be important in my life and no longer was. A chapter that had closed completely. Eva noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, genuinely meaning it. I typed out a response, keeping it simple and honest. "Thanks. I finally am." I didn't elaborate, didn't explain, didn't leave the door open for further conversation. Just acknowledged her message and moved on, which felt like the perfect metaphor for where I was in life. "Who was that?" Reggie asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Nobody important," I said, setting my phone down and picking up my beer. "Just someone from my past who's firmly staying there." Eva smiled at me, and I smiled back, feeling the weight of the past year settle into something that felt less like loss and more like liberation. Sure, I'd lost a wife and her family, but I'd gained something far more valuable, myself. My self-respect, my boundaries, my understanding that love shouldn't cost everything you have to give and still leave you empty. The conversation drifted to other topics. Eva's latest project designing affordable housing units, Reggie's upcoming trial that was apparently going to be legendary in all the best ways, David's kid getting into MIT. Normal stuff. Good stuff. The kind of conversations that fill your life when you stop surrounding yourself with people who drain it. Around midnight, as people started heading out, I walked Eva to her car. The Seattle night was crisp and clear, rare for October, and you could actually see stars between the city lights. "Thank you for coming," I said, taking her hand. "For being here. For being you." "Where else would I be?" she replied simply. "This is exactly where I want to be." And standing there on the street outside my apartment building, holding hands with a woman who chose to be there instead of feeling entitled to be there, I realized something profound. My 40th birthday had been the worst night of my life, the culmination of a decade of gradually losing myself to people who never valued what they had. But it had also been the catalyst for everything good that came after. Sometimes you have to hit rock bottom, or in my case, get hit with cranberry juice, to realize you've been living in a hole and it's time to climb out. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing, because it finally gives you the clarity and courage to change what you should have changed years ago. "What are you thinking about?" Eva asked, studying my face in the streetlight. "Just that I'm grateful," I said honestly. For last year's disaster, for learning what I deserved, for cranberry juice and public humiliation and hitting my breaking point. Because all of that led to this. To right now. To being genuinely happy for the first time in longer than I can remember. She kissed me then, soft and sweet and uncomplicated, and I thought about how different this felt from anything I'd experienced with Sophia. This felt like partnership instead of patronage, like mutual respect instead of one-sided obligation, like building something together instead of funding someone else's vision while pretending I was included. Later, after Eva left and I was alone in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the good stuff I'd bought myself as a birthday present, and stood by the window looking out at the city lights reflecting off the water. Somewhere out there, Sophia was probably working her shift at Nordstrom. Zara was probably posting about her latest MLM adventure. Judith was probably still telling people she'd chosen to downsize for philosophical reasons instead of financial necessity. And me? I was here, in my own space, living my own life, free from the weight of other people's expectations and entitlement. Not because I'd destroyed them or sought revenge or become the villain in their story, but because I'd finally done the simplest, hardest thing. I'd valued myself enough to stop accepting less than I deserved. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window, to the man looking back at me who'd spent 40 years learning to be what other people needed and 1 year learning to be enough for himself. "Happy birthday, Marcus," I said out loud to the empty apartment. "Here's to learning that peace isn't bought. It's earned, one canceled credit card at a time." The city lights twinkled back at me like a million tiny affirmations, and I drank to new beginnings, to hard lessons learned, to the beautiful simplicity of finally being free. And somewhere in the universe, I like to imagine karma was taking notes, making sure that cranberry juice stain on my $5,000 suit had been worth every penny. Because looking at my life now, at the genuine happiness and peace I'd found on the other side of that humiliation, it absolutely was. My wife announced, "I'm engaged to someone else. We've been seeing each other for months." While still living in my house, I said, "Congratulations to you both." Then I had her escorted out by police that evening and changed every lock and security code. When her fiancé showed up demanding she be let back in. Look, I'm not the kind of guy who gets blindsided easily. My name's Graham Stone. I'm 39 years old. I've been a project director for the last 8 years, and I own a pretty decent 3-bedroom house in the suburbs with a mortgage I've been chipping away at like some kind of financial warrior. I've survived corporate restructuring, budget cuts that would make her accountant weep, and that one-time Jerry from accounting microwaved fish in the break room for 3 consecutive weeks. Point is, I've seen some things. I've handled some situations. I consider myself a reasonably competent adult human being who can navigate the choppy waters of modern existence without completely losing my mind. But apparently, all that experience, all that careful planning and risk assessment I do for a living, meant absolutely nothing when it came to preparing me for what happened that Thursday night. It started, innocently enough, which should have been my first clue that the universe was setting me up for something spectacular. Clara, my wife of 4 years. Yeah, let that marinate for a second. Decided she was going to cook dinner. Now, Clara cooking dinner wasn't exactly a red flag on its own. She'd been known to throw together a meal here and there, usually when she wanted something or was feeling particularly domestic, for approximately 45 minutes before the novelty wore off. But this particular Thursday, she went all out. We're talking homemade spaghetti with actual sauce that didn't come from a jar, garlic bread that smelled like it belonged in some Italian grandmother's kitchen, and she'd even set the table with the nice plates we got as a wedding gift from her aunt and had used maybe twice since then. The real kicker, though? She'd opened one of my good bottles of wine. Not the $12 stuff we usually grabbed from the grocery store, but the actually decent bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion. That should have been warning sign number 2, but like an idiot, I just thought maybe she'd gotten a raise at work or wanted to celebrate something nice for once. I came home from the office that evening feeling pretty good, actually. We'd just locked down a major contract extension, my boss had been unusually complimentary about my work, and the traffic on the drive home had been lighter than usual, which in this city is basically like winning a small lottery. I walked through the door, smelled the garlic and tomatoes, saw the candles lit on the dining room table, and thought to myself, hey, maybe things are looking up. Maybe Clara's finally going to suggest we start trying for a family or something. Maybe she wants to plan that trip to Portland we'd been talking about for the last year and a half. I genuinely believed I was walking into something positive. The level of delusion I was operating under at that moment should probably be studied by psychologists. We sat down, she served the food, poured the wine into glasses that actually matched for once, and we made small talk about our days. She told me about some drama at her office involving someone named Bethany who apparently couldn't format a spreadsheet to save her life. I told her about the contract extension and Jerry's latest crime against office kitchen etiquette. Everything seemed normal, maybe even nicer than normal. Then she got this look on her face, this weird combination of excitement and nervousness that I'd seen before but couldn't quite place in the moment. She took a sip of wine, set down her fork with this deliberate little motion, and said those words that will probably echo in my brain until I'm old and gray. Graham, I have something important to tell you. My mind immediately started running through possibilities. Pregnancy announcement? Career change? Maybe she wanted to adopt a dog, which honestly I would have been fine with. Hell, at that moment, sitting there with a mouthful of surprisingly decent spaghetti, I would have agreed to a ferret if that's what she wanted. I smiled at her, nodded encouragingly, and said something incredibly stupid like, "Sure. Honey, what's up?" That's when she placed her left hand flat on the table, palm down, fingers spread, and I noticed it immediately. There was a ring on her finger, not her wedding ring. That was still there on the appropriate finger where it had been for 4 years. This was a different ring, a new ring, sitting pretty on her ring finger of her right hand, catching the candlelight and sparkling like it was trying to win some kind of achievement award for most inappropriate jewelry. For a second, just a brief, beautiful second, I thought maybe it was a gift from her mom or something she'd bought herself. Women do that sometimes, right? They buy themselves rings, treat themselves to something nice. But then she smiled, this big, bright, genuinely excited smile that made me realize whatever was coming next was going to be absolutely catastrophic for my evening plans. She looked me dead in the eye, still smiling like she was announcing she'd won the lottery, and said with more enthusiasm than I'd heard from her in months, "I'm engaged. To Miles. We've been seeing each other for months now, and he proposed last weekend, and I just had to tell you because this is so exciting and I wanted you to hear it from me first." I'm pretty sure my brain shut down for a solid 5 seconds. Just completely stopped processing information like a computer that had been asked to divide by 0. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, staring at this woman I'd married, who was living in my house, eating food prepared in my kitchen, drinking my good wine, and telling me she was engaged to someone else. Someone named Miles. Someone she'd apparently been seeing for months. The absurdity of the situation was so overwhelming that I actually couldn't compute it at first. It was like she'd just announced she was moving to Mars or had decided to become a professional alligator wrestler. The words made sense individually, but strung together in that particular order, they created a sentence that seemed to violate several fundamental laws of reality. I put my fork down slowly, very carefully, because suddenly I didn't trust my motor functions. I looked at the ring again, really looked at it this time, taking in the details. It wasn't a cheap ring either. This Miles character had apparently spent some actual money. Then I looked back at Clara, who was still smiling, still excited, still acting like she'd just shared the most wonderful news in the world instead of dropping a nuclear bomb directly onto our dining room table. I could feel my eyes starting to twitch, which is something that only happens when I'm experiencing stress levels that would make most people require prescription medication. I took a slow breath, picked up my wine glass, took a sip that was definitely more of a gulp, and said with what I thought was remarkable composure, "You're engaged to someone else while still living in my house." She nodded enthusiastically, like I'd just asked her if she wanted dessert. "Yes. Isn't it exciting? I know it's a lot to process, Graham, but Miles and I have really found something special, and I wanted to be honest with you about it. I think honesty is so important in situations like this, don't you?" Situations like this. Like there was a handbook somewhere for how to handle your wife announcing her engagement to another man over spaghetti dinner. Like this was a normal, everyday occurrence that people just navigated with good communication and mutual respect. The audacity alone should have won her some kind of award. If they gave out Olympic medals for sheer, unfiltered nerve, Clara would have been standing on that podium with gold hanging around her neck while the national anthem played. "Yeah," I said, my voice coming out flat and dead in a way that suggested my soul had already started packing its bags. "Yeah, that's really exciting, Clara. Super exciting. Exciting like finding out your parachute's defective mid-skydive. Exciting like food poisoning from that sketchy gas station sushi. Exciting like a root canal performed by a dentist who learned everything from YouTube videos." She stopped smiling. Finally, her expression shifted to something confused, like she couldn't understand why I wasn't jumping up and down with joy about her new relationship status. And honestly, that might have been the most insulting part of the whole thing. Not that she'd been cheating on me for months. Not that she'd accepted a proposal from another man while still married to me. But that she'd somehow convinced herself that I'd be happy about it. That level of delusion was almost impressive. So there I was, sitting across from my wife. Sorry, my soon-to-be ex-wife, though she didn't seem to have gotten that memo yet. Watching her face cycle through about 15 different expressions as she tried to figure out why I wasn't throwing her a congratulatory party. The confusion on her face was genuine, which somehow made the whole situation even more insulting. It was like she'd actually expected me to pop a bottle of champagne, shake Miles' hand whenever I met him, and maybe offer to help them pick out wedding venues. The disconnect between her expectations and reality was so vast you could have driven a semi-truck through it with room to spare on both sides. But then she did something that, looking back on it now, perfectly encapsulated everything that was wrong with our marriage and probably her entire approach to human relationships. She launched into what she called her transition plan. Yeah, you heard that right. She had a plan. She'd actually sat down, probably with Miles, maybe over brunch at some trendy cafe where they serve $8 avocado toast, and mapped out how this whole situation was going to work. The sheer organizational effort that must have gone into planning your own betrayal while maintaining the facade of a functional marriage was almost admirable in its sociopathic efficiency. Clara folded her hands on the table, right next to her pasta that was getting cold, because apparently discussing your infidelity really kills the appetite, and started explaining this brilliant strategy she'd concocted. "So, Graham," she began, using that voice she usually reserved for explaining things to her younger cousins or talking to customer service representatives, "I know this is a big change, and I want to make sure we handle it maturely. Miles and I have been looking at apartments, but the market right now is just insane, you know? Everything's so expensive, and we want to find the right place, somewhere that really feels like home. So I was thinking, just for a few weeks, maybe a month or two at the most, I could stay here while we find something perfect. It would give us time to figure out the logistics, maybe work out how to divide things fairly, and it wouldn't be rushed or stressful for anyone." I sat there listening to her outline this absolutely deranged proposal, sipping my scotch because the wine suddenly wasn't strong enough for this conversation, and I felt something inside me shift. You know that moment in movies where the protagonist suddenly achieves clarity? Where everything becomes crystal clear and they know exactly what they need to do. Yeah, it was like that, except instead of some profound spiritual awakening, I just realized I was done. Completely, utterly, irreversibly done with this nonsense. 4 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. With my wife asking if she could crash at my place while she apartment hunted with her new fiancé. The audacity had reached levels that shouldn't have been scientifically possible. I set down my glass with a gentle clink that seemed way too civilized for the moment, looked directly at Clara with what I hoped was my best poker face, and said in the calmest voice I could manage, "Congratulations to you both." Her face lit up immediately, like someone had flipped a switch. The relief that washed over her features was so profound it was almost comical. She actually let out this little laugh, this nervous giggle that suggested she'd been worried about my reaction, but now thought everything was going to be fine. "Oh, thank you, Graham. Thank you so much. I was really worried you might overreact or get emotional about this. I know it's unconventional, but I really appreciate you being so understanding about everything. This is why I always knew we could stay friends through this transition. You're being so mature about it." Mature. She thought I was being mature. Sweet, delusional Clara. I let her bask in that misunderstanding for exactly 3 more seconds before I continued. "You're welcome. Really. I'm happy for you. And to help you celebrate this exciting new chapter in your life, I think you should start packing. Tonight, actually. Like, right now would be great." The smile froze on her face like someone had hit pause on a video. Her eyes went wide, her mouth opened slightly, and I could practically see the gears in her brain grinding to a halt as she tried to process what I'd just said. "Wait, what?" "Graham, I just explained the plan. I need a few weeks, maybe 2 months at the most." "Yeah, I heard the plan," I interrupted, pouring myself another scotch because this conversation was going to require more alcohol than I'd initially anticipated. It was a fascinating plan, really creative, very detailed. I especially like the part where you get engaged to another man, and then ask your husband if you can keep living in his house rent-free while you search for the perfect love nest. That took some real imagination. But here's the thing, Clara, I have a different plan. My plan is simpler. It involves you packing your belongings, loading them into your car, and finding literally anywhere else to be that isn't here. Your parents' house, Miles' place, a hotel, a friend's couch, under a bridge. Honestly, I'm not picky about the destination as long as the journey starts immediately. Her face went from confused to shocked to angry in about 2 seconds flat. "You can't be serious right now. Graham, you can't just throw me out. I live here. This is my home too. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where I got to deliver one of the most satisfying corrections of my entire life. Actually, Clara, this is my home. My name on the deed, my name on the mortgage, my money that made the down payment. You've been living here, sure, but let's not pretend you've been contributing to the property value. And here's the really important part. You just announced you're engaged to another man. You're not my wife anymore in any meaningful sense except the legal paperwork we're definitely going to be addressing very soon. You're essentially a guest who just announced she's moving out. So I'm simply expediting that process. Consider it my engagement gift to you and Miles. The gift of urgency." She stared at me like I'd just sprouted a second head that was speaking fluent Mandarin. "This is insane. You're being completely unreasonable. I need time to figure things out, to find a place, to organize my things. You can't just decide I have to leave right this second." But I absolutely could, and I was about to prove it. "You're right that you need time to figure things out." I agreed, standing up from the table because sitting down felt too passive for what needed to happen next. "But you should have thought about that before you accepted another man's proposal while living under my roof. That was your moment to figure things out. That was your opportunity to plan ahead. Instead, you chose to drop this bomb over spaghetti and expect me to just roll with it. So yeah, we're upgrading your relationship status from married and living here to engaged to someone else and living literally anywhere else." That's when Clara made what I can only describe as a catastrophically bad decision. She grabbed her phone from the table, opened up the camera, pointed it at me, and started recording. Her voice took on this dramatic, victimized quality that would have been hilarious if it wasn't so pathetic. "Everyone needs to see this. This is emotional abuse. My husband is throwing me out of my home with no warning, no consideration for my safety or well-being. This is what I've been dealing with for years." I looked at the camera, then at her, then back at the camera, and I waved. Just a friendly little wave, the kind you'd give to a neighbor across the street. "Hi there, Internet. Make sure you tell them the whole story, sweetheart. Make sure you mention the engagement ring from your boyfriend, Miles. Make sure you tag the right husband in your post, the new one, not me. Her face turned an impressive shade of red that I didn't know human skin could achieve without some kind of medical intervention. She was sputtering, trying to come up with a response that would somehow make her look like the victim in this situation, when I pulled out my own phone and did something I never thought I'd have to do in my own home. I dialed 911. Clara's eyes went even wider, which I didn't think was physically possible at this point. What are you doing? You can't call the police. I haven't done anything illegal. And technically, she was right. Cheating on your spouse isn't illegal, just spectacularly crappy. But what I said next was completely accurate. Hello? Yes, I need police assistance for a domestic situation. I have someone in my home who I need to have removed. No, there's no violence, no threats, just someone who needs to understand that when you announce you're engaged to another man, you lose your housing privileges. The operator asked me to stay on the line, said officers would be there shortly, and suggested I wait outside if I felt unsafe. I almost laughed. Unsafe? The only thing I was in danger of was laughing so hard I'd pull a muscle. Clara had stopped recording and was now frantically texting, probably trying to get Miles to come rescue her or calling her friends to tell them what a monster I was being. And you know what? I didn't care. Not even a little bit. For the first time in probably years, I felt completely, absolutely, perfectly justified in my actions. She'd made her choice when she said yes to Miles. Now she was going to live with the consequences of that choice, just not in my house. The thing about calling the cops on your cheating wife is that it really puts a damper on the whole dinner ambience. The candles were still flickering on the table. The spaghetti was congealing into something that probably violated several health codes, and Clara was pacing back and forth in the living room like a caged animal who just realized the cage door was about to open in a very unfavorable direction. She kept alternating between texting furiously and shooting me these looks that I think were supposed to make me feel guilty, but honestly, just made me want to laugh. The Audacity Olympics were still in full swing, and she was apparently going for the gold in the category of most delusional response to consequences. I stepped outside to wait because being in the same room with her was starting to give me a headache that even the scotch couldn't fix. The night air was cool, clear, and blissfully free of women announcing their engagements to other men. I stood on my front porch, on my property, that I paid for, and waited for what I assumed would be the most awkward police interaction of my life. In my head, I was already running through how this conversation was going to go. Hi, officers. Yes, my wife is engaged to another man, and I'd like her to leave. It sounded insane even in my internal monologue. But hey, we were living in insane times. 2 squad cars pulled up about 12 minutes later, which honestly was pretty impressive response time for a non-emergency domestic call. 4 officers got out, 2 from each car, and they had that particular look that cops get when they're responding to what they assume is going to be a messy situation. The older one, probably mid-50s with gray hair and the kind of mustache that suggested he'd been on the force since before I was born, approached first. Evening, sir. You called about a domestic situation? His partner was younger, maybe late 20s, and had the expression of someone who'd already seen too much weird stuff tonight and was really hoping this wasn't going to add to the collection. I nodded and launched into the explanation I'd been rehearsing. Yes, officer. Here's the situation, and I know it's going to sound bizarre, but I promise you I'm completely sober and this is all real. My wife. Well, technically still my wife for now, just announced during dinner that she's engaged to another man named Miles. She's been seeing him for months apparently. He proposed, she accepted, and then she asked if she could keep living here for a few weeks while they apartment hunt together. I declined that generous offer and asked her to leave. She refused. So here we are. The older cop's eyebrows went up so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. The younger one actually let out a small snort that he tried to cover with a cough. Let me make sure I'm understanding this correctly, the older officer said slowly, like he was trying to make sure he'd heard me right. Your wife told you she's engaged to someone else, while you two are still married, and she wants to continue living in your house. I nodded. Yeah, that's the size of it. She called it a transition plan. I called it grounds for immediate eviction. The other 2 officers had approached by this point, and one of them, a woman who looked like she'd probably heard every excuse in the book and then some, asked the obvious question. And she's inside now. I confirmed she was, probably still texting her sob story to anyone who would listen. All right, Let's go talk to her, the older cop said, and I could see he was trying very hard not to smile. We walked back into my house, and Clara immediately went into performance mode. She'd been crying, or at least trying to make it look like she'd been crying. And when she saw the officers, she pointed at me dramatically like I was some kind of villain in a soap opera. Officers, thank God you're here. My husband is trying to throw me out of my own home with no warning. I've lived here for years, and he's suddenly decided I have to leave tonight, right now, with nowhere to go? This is my home too. She actually managed to make her voice crack on that last part, which would have been impressive if it wasn't so transparently manipulative. The female officer looked at her with an expression that suggested she'd seen this routine before. Ma'am, can you explain the situation from your perspective? Why does your husband want you to leave? Clara hesitated, and I could see her brain working overtime trying to figure out how to explain this without making herself sound completely insane. We're having marital difficulties, she finally said, which was possibly the understatement of the century. But that doesn't give him the right to just kick me out. The older cop turned to me. Sir, do you have documentation showing this is your property? I pulled out my phone faster than a gunslinger in an old western and showed them the property deed, my driver's license with this address, mortgage statements, utility bills, everything that proved this house was mine in every legal sense that mattered. Then, because I'm apparently petty when I've been betrayed over Italian food, I pulled up the photos I'd taken earlier of Clara's hand with the engagement ring on full display. And here's the ring from her fiancé, Miles, taken about 20 minutes before I called you folks. She's engaged to another man while still married to me and living in my house. I figured that was relevant context. The younger cop actually had to turn away because he was definitely laughing now. The female officer looked at Clara with an expression that had shifted from neutral to something that looked a lot like disappointed disgust. Ma'am, is this true? Are you engaged to someone else? Clara's face went through several colors in rapid succession. That's not illegal, she protested, which technically was true, but also completely missed the point. It's not about my personal relationships. This is about him forcing me out of my home. The older cop sighed the kind of sigh that suggested he'd been doing this job way too long and had seen way too much human stupidity. Ma'am, you announced you're marrying another man while living here? Clara nodded defensively. So what? That doesn't mean I don't have rights. You're right, the officer said, and for a second Clara looked triumphant. Then he continued, but let's clarify what rights you actually have. Do you have a lease agreement? Clara shook her head. Any rent receipts showing you pay to live here? Another head shake, more reluctant this time. Are any of the utility bills in your name? She was starting to see where this was going, and her face was getting paler by the second. They're all in his name, but I live here. I've lived here for years. That has to count for something. The younger cop, who'd finally gotten his laughter under control, stepped in. Ma'am, technically speaking, without a lease, without any financial documentation showing you pay rent or contribute to the household expenses in a formal way, you're legally classified as a guest in this residence. And guests can be asked to leave by the property owner at any time. Clara's mouth opened and closed like a fish that had suddenly found itself on dry land. That's not fair. We're married. This is my home too. The female officer's expression had gone from disappointed to something approaching sympathy, but not the kind that was going to help Clara. Ma'am, marriage does provide certain protections, but those protections become complicated when you announce you're engaged to another person. You're essentially declaring your intent to end the marriage. At that point, the homeowner has the right to ask you to leave. Clara turned to me, and I could see panic starting to set in behind her eyes. Graham, please, be reasonable about this. Where am I supposed to go? I shrugged, and I'll admit, I was enjoying this way more than I probably should have. I don't know, Clara. Where do engaged women usually go? Maybe to their fiancé's place? I'm sure Miles has a couch. Or a futon. He seems like a futon kind of guy. The older cop made a sound that might have been another suppressed laugh. Clara's panic was rapidly transforming into anger. I need time to figure things out. I need to pack. I need to find a place to stay. I need to. Call your fiancé. I interrupted, pulling out my phone to check the time like I had somewhere important to be. I'm sure he'll come running to rescue you. That's what fiancés do, right? They support each other. They provide for each other. So let him provide you with literally anything except continued residence in my house. The officers looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that cops seem to master. Finally, the older one spoke. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you pack some belongings and find alternative accommodation for tonight. If you have friends or family in the area, now would be a good time to call them." Clara burst into tears, real ones this time, and pulled out her phone. She walked into the bedroom I paid for, in the house I owned, and I could hear her having a frantic conversation with someone who I assumed was Miles. The female officer turned to me. "Sir, does she have belongings here that she'll need to collect?" I nodded. "Clothes, some personal items. Nothing that's actually mine. She can take everything that belongs to her." 20 minutes later, Clara emerged dragging 2 suitcases and carrying a bag that looked like it was about to burst. Her face was blotchy from crying, her makeup was ruined, and she looked absolutely furious. But the beautiful thing was, she was leaving. She was actually, genuinely leaving my house, probably forever. As she dragged her stuff toward the door, she stopped and pulled out her phone one more time, opening what looked like Instagram Live. "Everyone watching needs to know what's happening here," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "This is what happens when you try to be honest with someone. This is the kind of man Graham Stone really is." I waved at the camera again, because apparently that was becoming my signature move. "Make sure you tell them about Miles, honey. Make sure you show them that ring." She made a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream, shoved past the officers, and dragged her luggage out to her car. The older cop watched her go, then turned back to me with something that might have been respect in his eyes. "That's not illegal, but it's definitely dumb," he muttered, and I couldn't tell if he was talking about her announcing the engagement or her expecting to keep living here afterward. Probably both. As her car pulled out of the driveway, taillights disappearing down the street, the officer gave me one piece of advice that I'd already planned to follow. "Change your locks tonight, son. People do stupid things when they're emotional." I smiled. "Already scheduled. Locksmith's coming first thing tomorrow morning. I run on efficiency and caffeine, officer." He actually laughed at that, proper and genuine, and clapped me on the shoulder before heading back to his cruiser. I stood on my porch and watched them drive away, feeling lighter than I had in years. The house was quiet. The house was mine. And most importantly, the house was Clara-free. Best Thursday night I'd had in a long time. I woke up Friday morning feeling like a new man, which was weird considering I'd just had my marriage implode over pasta and witnessed my wife get escorted out by police while live streaming her victim narrative to the internet. But there's something about reclaiming your personal space from someone who'd been using it as a home base for their affair that just hits different. The bed felt bigger, the air felt cleaner, and for the first time in months, I didn't wake up with that vague sense of dread that something was wrong, but I couldn't quite figure out what. Turns out what was wrong was the cheating wife, and now that she was gone, everything felt weirdly right. That peaceful feeling lasted approximately 45 minutes, right up until I checked my phone and discovered I'd become the star of my own personal digital circus. 48 text messages, 22 missed calls, 17 voicemails that I absolutely was not going to listen to because life's too short for that kind of masochism. My phone had basically turned into a weapon of mass communication, and every single notification was someone who had an opinion about my life that I definitely didn't ask for. It was like opening Pandora's box, except instead of unleashing evil upon the world, I'd just unleashed the opinions of people who got all their information from Clara's carefully edited Instagram stories. The texts ranged from the sympathetic to the accusatory, with a whole lot of confused in between. Clara's friends were particularly active, sending me essays about what a terrible person I was for abandoning her in her time of need. Her time of need. Like getting engaged to another man while married to me was some kind of medical emergency that required my ongoing support and housing assistance. One of her friends, Jessica, who I'd never particularly liked anyway because she had the personality of a cheese grater, sent me a message that said, "I always knew you were controlling. Clara deserves so much better." I stared at that message for a solid minute, trying to figure out how asking your wife to move out after she announces her engagement to another man qualified as controlling. But then I remembered that Jessica thought astrology was real science and gave up trying to find logic in anything she said. But the real highlight of my morning came from Clara's mother, Patricia, who called me 3 times before finally leaving a voicemail that started with, "Graham, how could you?" in a tone that suggested I'd personally kicked a puppy in front of a kindergarten class. I called her back, not because I wanted to, But because Patricia had always been relatively reasonable, and I figured she deserved to hear the actual story rather than whatever heavily edited version Clara had fed her. The phone rang twice before she picked up, and I could already hear the judgment in her voice. Graham, I cannot believe what Clara told me happened last night. Throwing her out of the house with nowhere to go? After everything you two have been through together. I took a deep breath and counted to 3, employing the same patience I used when explaining basic project timelines to executives who thought everything could be done by yesterday. Patricia, did Clara mention why I asked her to leave? There was a pause, and I could practically hear the gears turning. She said you two had a fight about your marriage, and you just snapped and called the police on her. She said she's never seen you so angry, so unreasonable. Unreasonable. That was becoming a popular word in Clara's vocabulary. Did she mention she's engaged? I asked, keeping my voice level and calm. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Patricia spoke, and her voice had changed from accusatory to confused. Engaged? What are you talking about? Engaged to who? And there it was. The missing piece of information that Clara had conveniently left out of her sob story. To a guy named Miles. She announced it at dinner last night, showed me the ring, told me they'd been seeing each other for months. Then she asked if she could keep living in my house while they apartment hunted together. When I declined that generous offer and asked her to leave, she refused. That's why I called the police. I could hear Patricia sink into a chair on her end of the phone. The thud was audible. She's engaged? To another man? While still married to you? The disbelief in her voice was so profound I almost felt bad for her. Almost. That's correct. Announced it right after she served the spaghetti. Really killed the appetite, if I'm being honest. Patricia made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a groan. Oh my God. Graham, I had no idea. She didn't mention any of that. She just said you threw her out for no reason. Of course she did. Because taking responsibility for her actions would require Clara to acknowledge that actions have consequences, and that seemed to be a concept she'd never quite grasped. Yeah, well, now you know the whole story, I said, pouring myself coffee because this conversation was already exhausting and it wasn't even 9 in the morning yet. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Patricia, but I'm not going to apologize for asking my wife to leave after she announced she's marrying someone else. That seems like a pretty reasonable boundary to establish. Patricia was quiet for a moment, then said something that actually surprised me. You're absolutely right. Graham, I'm so sorry. I should have known there was more to the story. Clara has always had a way of presenting things in the way that makes her look best. That was possibly the most diplomatic way I'd ever heard someone say their daughter was a pathological liar, but I appreciated the sentiment. We talked for a few more minutes, with Patricia apologizing profusely and me assuring her it wasn't her fault her daughter had made spectacularly bad life choices. By the time we hung up, I actually felt a little better. At least one person in Clara's family understood why I'd done what I'd done. That was something. But the real entertainment started around noon when I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It took me a minute to figure out who it was, and then I saw the message and realized it was Miles. The fiancé himself. The homewrecker. The man who'd proposed to my wife and apparently thought that gave him some kind of moral high ground. His message read, "Bro, that was cold. You could have given her time. She's really upset and doesn't have anywhere to stay. You could have been more understanding about this whole situation." I stared at that message for a good 30 seconds, feeling my blood pressure rise with each word. Bro. He called me bro. This man who'd been sleeping with my wife, who'd proposed to her while she was still married to me, who'd helped her plan a transition that involved continuing to live in my house rent-free, had the absolute audacity to call me bro and lecture me about being understanding. The sheer nerve required to send that message should have been studied by scientists. It was like watching someone punch you in the face and then get mad that you didn't say thank you. My response was brief and to the point. Bro, you proposed to my wife while she lived in my house. You don't get to have opinions about how I handle the aftermath. Take your concern and your fiancé and go cry about it literally anywhere else. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then immediately blocked his number because I didn't need that kind of negativity in my life. If he wanted to communicate further, he could do it through lawyers like a normal person going through a divorce. But wait, there's more. Because apparently Friday was destined to be the day everyone wanted to share their unsolicited opinions about my life. By early afternoon, Clara had posted on Facebook, because of course she had, about escaping a toxic man and finally finding real love after years of emotional manipulation. The post had a photo of her and Miles looking couple Y and happy, both of them smiling at the camera like they'd just won something instead of destroying a marriage. The caption talked about new beginnings and not letting anyone dim your light, and a bunch of other inspirational quote nonsense that sounded like it came from a motivation poster in a corporate bathroom. The comments section was a battlefield. Clara's friends were all posting heart emojis and messages of support, telling her how brave she was and how she deserved happiness. But then there were other people who apparently knew both of us or had figured out what actually happened, who were calling her out. Someone named David, who I vaguely remembered as a co-worker of hers, commented, "Wait, aren't you still married to Graham?" Confused about the timeline. Every reasonable part of my brain was someone I didn't know at all. Just ignore it. To take the high road while married, to let her embarrass herself without my input. I knew I shouldn't engage. But you know what? I'd been taking the high road for years, and where had it gotten me? Cheated on and served engagement news with my own wine. So I did something I normally would never do. I commented. Just once. Just one single comment that said, "You announced your engagement over dinner. I merely offered dessert, called justice a la mode." The response was immediate and glorious. Within minutes, that comment had dozens of likes. People were sharing it, quoting it, turning it into the kind of social media moment that takes on a life of its own. Someone replied with "savage" in all caps. Another person wrote, "This man woke up and chose violence." My personal favorite was someone who said, "Justice a la mode, I'm deceased." Even some of Clara's friends seemed to pause and reconsider their support, probably realizing there was more to the story than her carefully curated victim narrative. Clara, naturally, deleted the entire post within an hour, but the internet is forever and screenshots are free. Multiple people had already captured it, and I saw it circulating on Twitter by late afternoon with captions like, "Man serves cold revenge," and "When keeping it real goes wrong." My comment specifically got over 4,000 likes on various platforms, which was more social media engagement than I'd gotten in my entire life combined. Apparently, people really appreciated a good comeback when they saw one, especially when it came with the kind of context that made it clear who the actual villain was in this situation. By the time evening rolled around, my phone had finally started to calm down. The text messages slowed to a trickle, most of them now from people I actually liked who were checking to make sure I was okay and offering support. A few of my buddies from work sent messages ranging from, "Dude, saw what happened, you okay?" to "Holy shit, man, your comment is legendary." My best friend Marcus called me directly and said, "I always knew Clara was sketchy, but damn, this is next level. You need anything? Beer? Help moving her stuff to the curb? Someone to help you change the locks?" I assured him I had it handled, but I appreciated the offer. As I sat on my couch that evening, scrolling through the aftermath of what would probably be remembered as the wildest Friday I'd had in years, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not sadness, not even really satisfaction. Just relief. Pure, simple, uncomplicated relief. Clara was gone. Her stuff was gone. Her drama was becoming someone else's problem. And I had my house, my peace, and apparently a viral social media moment that would probably outlive us all. Things were looking up. Saturday evening rolled around with the kind of peaceful quiet I'd almost forgotten existed. I'd spent most of the day doing absolutely nothing productive and loving every minute of it. No drama, no phone calls from people demanding explanations, no live-streamed betrayals over Italian food. Just me, my couch, a beer that I didn't have to share, and a baseball game on TV that nobody was complaining about. It was domestic bliss in its purest form, and I was soaking it in like a man who'd just discovered what happiness actually felt like after years of thinking mild dissatisfaction was just the natural state of marriage. I was halfway through my second beer, the Yankees were up by 3 in the 7th inning, and I was contemplating ordering pizza for dinner when someone knocked on my door. Not a friendly knock either. This was an aggressive, demanding knock that suggested whoever was on the other side had an agenda and possibly an attitude problem. My first thought was that Clara had come back for round 2, maybe with reinforcements this time. My second thought was that I really should have installed that Ring doorbell I'd been thinking about. But my third thought, the one that actually got me off the couch, Was that whoever it was could knock all they wanted because this was my house, and I had the legal right to tell them to pound sand. I looked through the peephole and saw exactly what I'd been expecting ever since Clara mentioned his name over dinner on Thursday night. Miles, the fiancé himself, the homewrecker in human form. And he wasn't alone. He brought what looked like two of his buddies with him, because apparently confronting your girlfriend's husband requires backup. They were standing on my porch like some kind of discount Avengers team, all wearing expressions that suggested they thought they were about to accomplish something meaningful instead of making complete fools of themselves. Miles was exactly what I'd imagined based purely on the kind of guy who would propose to someone else's wife. Mid-30s, wearing a scarf indoors even though it was like 70 degrees outside, skinny jeans that looked painted on, and the kind of artfully messy hair that probably took 45 minutes to style every morning. He had that particular brand of confidence that comes from never actually being punched in the face, the kind of unearned swagger that suggested he'd spent most of his life having things work out for him through sheer audacity rather than actual competence. I disliked him immediately and thoroughly. I opened the door but left the security chain on, because I'm not an idiot and 3-on-1 odds aren't exactly sporting. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked, using my best customer service voice, the one I deployed when dealing with particularly stupid clients who thought deadlines were suggestions. Miles puffed up like a rooster, trying to look intimidating and mostly just looking like he was constipated. "We need to talk," he announced, like he was delivering an ultimatum in some kind of action movie instead of standing on the porch of a man whose wife he'd stolen. "That's interesting," I replied, keeping my voice pleasant and my hand on my phone in my pocket, finger already hovering over the emergency call button because I'd learned my lesson about documenting everything. "Because I don't remember requesting your presence or your opinion. In fact, I'm pretty sure I blocked your number after that ridiculous text you sent yesterday. So I'm curious what makes you think we have anything to discuss." One of his friends, a guy with a man bun who looked like he exclusively drank craft beer and had opinions about vinyl records, stepped forward like he was trying to be intimidating. "Bro, don't be difficult. Miles is trying to be reasonable here." I had to suppress a laugh at that. Miles, being reasonable. The man who'd been having an affair with my wife and then had the nerve to text me about being more understanding was now on my property, claiming to be reasonable. Reasonable, I repeated slowly, tasting the word like it was something sour. "That's fascinating. Please, enlighten me about what part of this situation involves reason. Is it the part where your buddy here proposed to my wife while she was living in my house? Or is it the part where he's now standing on my property, demanding to talk to me like we're old friends who need to hash out a misunderstanding?" Miles' face turned red, which I noted with some satisfaction. "Look, man, I didn't come here to fight. Clara is really upset about what happened. She's been crying for 2 days straight. You traumatized her." Traumatized? That was a new one. I traumatized her by asking her to leave after she announced her engagement to another man. The mental gymnastics required to arrive at that conclusion deserved some kind of Olympic medal. "You mean when she traumatized my spaghetti by announcing her infidelity over dinner?" "Yeah, that was pretty rough for everyone involved. The pasta especially. It never recovered." The third guy, who looked like he might actually have some brain cells unlike his two companions, shifted uncomfortably. He was starting to realize this wasn't going to go the way they'd planned. But Miles, bless his delusional heart, pressed on. "We're here for her things. She has belongings in this house that she needs, and you're keeping them from her." I raised an eyebrow. "Her things? You mean the things she took with her Thursday night when the police escorted her out? Those things? Because she seemed to pack pretty thoroughly. Or are you talking about different things?" "She couldn't take everything," Miles insisted, his voice rising slightly. "She needs her winter clothes, some personal items, things that are important to her. You can't just keep her stuff hostage." Hostage? My house had apparently become a detention center for Clara's belongings. "First of all," I said, speaking slowly like I was explaining something to a particularly dim child, "anything she left behind can be collected during reasonable hours with advance notice, which this is not. Second, most of what's in this house belongs to me because I paid for it. The couch? Mine. The TV? Mine. The bed she cheated in? Definitely mine, and honestly, I'm thinking about burning it for ceremonial purposes. She contributed to this household." Miles protested, and I could see him getting more agitated. His friends were exchanging glances now, probably starting to realize this was a bad idea. She contributed opinions. I agreed cheerfully. Occasionally drama. Sometimes passive-aggressive comments about my work schedule. But in terms of actual financial contributions, unless you count spending money as a contribution, she was more of a financial liability than an asset. But hey, good news, she's your liability now. Congratulations on the upgrade. Man bun guy tried again, probably thinking he could reason with me since Miles clearly wasn't getting anywhere. Dude, be the bigger person here. Just let Miles take some of her stuff, and we'll leave. This doesn't have to be complicated. I smiled at him, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes and usually makes people nervous. See, here's what's complicated. 3 grown men showing up at my house unannounced on a Saturday evening, demanding I hand over property without any legal documentation or authority. That's complicated. Know what makes it less complicated? Not doing any of that. Miles was practically vibrating with frustration now. I can't believe Clara was married to you for 4 years. You're impossible to deal with. Coming from the man who'd been dealing with my wife behind my back, that was rich. Yeah, it's almost like having someone ask for reasonable things, like not cheating, not getting engaged to other people, not expecting to live rent-free after betraying you, is really difficult for some people to handle. Wild how that works. I pulled out my phone and made a show of checking the time. Now, you gentlemen have about 30 seconds to get off my property before I call the police for the second time this week. And honestly, I'm starting to develop a rapport with the local cops. Officer Daniels is really growing on me. The third guy immediately started backing toward the street, clearly the smartest of the trio. Miles, man, let's just go. This isn't worth it. But Miles, displaying the same judgment that led him to propose to a married woman, decided to try one more angle. You know what? Fine. Keep her stuff. But you're going to regret this. You're going to regret how you treated her. I laughed, genuinely laughed, because the threat was so absurd I couldn't help myself. Buddy, please. The only thing I regret is not checking the expiration date on my marriage sooner. Now, are you going to leave voluntarily, or do I need to add getting a restraining order against my wife's boyfriend to my weekend to-do list? We're going, Man Bun said, physically grabbing Miles by the arm and pulling him backward. This was stupid anyway. They started walking toward what I assumed was Miles' car, probably something pretentious like a Prius with a coexist bumper sticker, but Miles couldn't resist getting in one last comment. He turned back and shouted, "The police aren't going to help you forever. Eventually, you're going to have to be reasonable about this." I waved from the doorway, channeling the same friendly energy I'd given Clara's Instagram live audience. Tell you what, Miles, when you want to discuss being reasonable, try not showing up uninvited with your goon squad. Maybe send a lawyer like a normal person. Also love the scarf. Really pulls the whole guy who steals wives aesthetic together. His face went an even deeper shade of red, and I thought for a second he might actually try to come back and start something, which would have been hilarious because I had my phone recording the whole interaction. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of peace that comes from knowing all your doors are locked, your security system is armed, and your ex-wife's boyfriend has been thoroughly embarrassed on your front porch. I was halfway through my coffee, scrolling through my phone and enjoying the fact that I could leave dishes in the sink without getting a passive-aggressive comment about it, when I noticed Clara had been busy overnight. Real busy. Like, I have no job to go to tomorrow, so I'm going to wage a social media war at 2 in the morning kind of busy. She'd posted what could only be described as a manifesto on Instagram. Not just one post, but a whole series of them, like she was teaching a masterclass in victimhood. The main post featured a photo of her looking sad and contemplative, staring out a window with perfect lighting that suggested she'd spent at least 20 minutes getting the shot just right. The caption was a novel. I survived emotional abuse and found real love. It began, and honestly, I had to put my coffee down because I was laughing too hard to drink it safely. Survived emotional abuse. I'd asked her to move out after she announced her engagement to another man, and somehow in her mind, that translated to abuse. The mental gymnastics were Olympic level. The post went on and on about finally breaking free from toxic patterns and finding someone who sees my worth, and a bunch of other inspirational garbage that sounded like it had been copied from a self-help book written by someone who'd never actually experienced hardship. She talked about years of being controlled and walking on eggshells in our marriage, which was fascinating because I distinctly remembered her doing whatever she wanted whenever she wanted, including apparently sleeping with Miles for months without any interference from me. If that was control, I was doing it spectacularly wrong. The comments section was full of her friends posting heart emojis and messages like, "You're so brave," and "You deserve all the happiness," and "He never deserved you anyway." It was like watching a support group for people who'd never actually met me, but had somehow decided I was the villain in a story they'd only heard one side of. Jessica, the astrology friend who thought Mercury retrograde was responsible for all her problems, commented, "I'm so proud of you for leaving that toxic situation," which was hilarious considering Clara hadn't left. She'd been asked to leave after announcing her engagement to another man. Details, apparently, were optional. But here's the thing about social media. It's all fun and games until someone brings receipts. And sweetheart, I had receipts like a CVS register. I'd spent a good portion of Saturday evening, after Miles and his discount Avengers had left, organizing documentation. Screenshots of text messages, Venmo requests, bank statements, Amazon order histories. All the boring financial stuff that tells the real story of who contributed what to our marriage. So I did what any reasonable person would do when facing a smear campaign. I posted my own Instagram story, just a simple series of screenshots with minimal commentary, because the evidence spoke for itself. First up, Clara's Venmo requests to me over the past year. Hundreds of dollars for groceries that somehow never materialized into actual food in our fridge. Money for gas when she barely drove anywhere. Requests for essentials that turned out to be designer candles and throw pillows. My favorite was a request from 2 weeks ago for $85 labeled our anniversary dinner that I'd apparently funded even though our anniversary wasn't for another 3 months. Every single request had been approved and paid by me, because that's what I did. I paid for everything while she contributed what she called emotional labor, which apparently meant complaining about my work schedule and occasionally burning toast. Next, text messages from literally last week where she'd signed off with "Love you, hubby," and "Can't wait for dinner tonight, babe." These were from 3 days before she announced her engagement, which suggested either she had incredibly fast-moving feelings or, more likely, she'd been lying to my face while planning her exit strategy. I included a screenshot from last Tuesday where she'd asked me to pick up her dry cleaning and ended the message with a heart emoji. She'd literally used my money to buy decorations for her engagement party to another man. You can't make this stuff up. It was so absurd, so perfectly encapsulating everything wrong with the situation that I almost had to admire the audacity. Almost. I posted all of it with one simple caption. Context matters. That was it. No lengthy explanation, no emotional appeals, no trying to make myself look like a victim. Just the facts, ma'am, laid out in easy-to-read screenshots that told the story way better than any amount of inspirational word salad ever could. Within an hour, the internet had rendered its verdict, and it was unanimous. Clara had taken an L so massive it needed its own zip code. The comments started rolling in immediately, and they were glorious. "Wait, she used your money for her engagement party to another man?" wrote someone I didn't even know. Another comment read, "Emotional abuse is when you pay for everything and then ask someone to leave after they cheat? Girl, that's not abuse, that's called consequences." Even some of Clara's friends had apparently seen enough evidence to reconsider their support. One of them, someone named Michelle who I vaguely remembered from a dinner party 2 years ago, commented, "Okay, there's definitely more to this story than we were told." My personal favorite comment came from a complete stranger who wrote, "Imagine cheating, getting engaged to your side piece, asking your husband to keep funding your life, and then calling him abusive when he says no. The audacity is astronomical." That comment got over 1,000 likes and was shared to Twitter, where it got even more traction. Another gem. She really bought engagement party supplies with his Amazon account. That's the toxic behavior here. Someone else wrote, "This man really said, 'Here are the receipts,' and meant it literally." The internet, for all its flaws, really does appreciate a good takedown when it's backed by evidence. Clara's support system started crumbling faster than a sandcastle at high tide. The heart emojis stopped. The "You're so brave" comments dried up. Her original posts started getting different kinds of attention. People asking pointed questions like, "Did you tell them you were engaged to someone else when you posted about abuse?" and were you using his money while seeing Miles? Jessica even deleted her supportive comment, which I noticed because I'd screenshotted earlier. The astrology apparently couldn't save her from basic pattern recognition. By mid-afternoon, Clara had deleted her entire post, all the stories, everything. Just wiped her Instagram clean like it never happened. But the internet, beautiful, eternal internet, never forgets. People had screenshot everything. The whole saga was circulating on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, everywhere. Someone had even made a TikTok about it with dramatic music, reading the screenshots out loud. It had 100,000 views. I was trending, sort of, in the most bizarre way possible. Even Clara's cousin, who I'd always actually liked during family gatherings because she was one of the few people in that family with common sense, commented on one of the circulating screenshots. "Girl, this ain't it. This ain't it at all." That comment alone probably hurt worse than anything else, because family turning on you in public is a special kind of mortifying. But honestly, she'd earned it. Every bit of public embarrassment, every deleted comment, every person who suddenly realized they'd been supporting the wrong side of this story, she'd earned all of it by thinking she could control the narrative without anyone fact-checking her version of events. I sat back, finished my coffee, and watched the internet do what it does best: hold people accountable with ruthless efficiency and zero mercy. Monday morning came with a realization that made my coffee taste even better than usual. You know that silver SUV Clara had been driving around for the past 2 years? The one she'd been posting pictures with, using for her grocery runs, taking to visit Miles, and generally treating like it was her personal property? Yeah, that was mine. Fully, completely, legally mine. I'd bought it, my name was on the title, I'd been making the payments, and the insurance came straight out of my bank account every month. She'd been telling everyone it was a gift from me, which was technically true in the same way that letting your wife use your car during a marriage is a gift. But marriages end, especially when one party announces their engagement to someone else over dinner, and gifts have a funny way of needing to be returned when you're no longer part of the family. I'd actually forgotten about the car situation until Saturday night, after Miles and his buddies had left, and I was doing my mental inventory of everything that needed to be handled in the divorce proceedings. The car popped into my head, and I literally laughed out loud. She'd taken it when she left Thursday night, loaded her suitcases into my vehicle, and driven off to wherever she was staying now, probably Miles' place, or her parents' house, or maybe she was living in the damn car for all I knew. But wherever she was driving around in a vehicle that belonged to me, that was registered to me, and that she had absolutely no legal claim to whatsoever. So I did what any reasonable person would do when they realize their cheating ex has stolen their car. I called the police non-emergency line and reported it stolen. The dispatcher sounded skeptical at first, probably because "my wife took my car" doesn't usually qualify as theft. But when I explained the situation, that she'd moved out, that we were separated, that the vehicle was solely in my name and she had no legal right to it, the tone changed pretty quick. "So she took the vehicle after you asked her to leave the residence?" The dispatcher confirmed. "Yes, ma'am," I replied. "She loaded her belongings into my SUV and drove off in it without permission. I want to report it stolen and have it recovered." There was some clicking of keys on the other end, probably pulling up my address and cross-referencing it with the previous calls from Thursday night. "Sir, are you the same Graham Stone who called about a domestic situation last week?" I confirmed I was. "And this is related to that same situation with your wife announcing her engagement?" I confirmed again, and I swear I heard the dispatcher suppress a laugh. "All right, Mr. Stone. We'll put out a bolo for the vehicle. When officers locate it, they'll contact you for recovery. Do you have the license plate and vehicle identification number handy?" I rattled off all the information, including the make, model, color, and even the little dent in the back bumper from when Clara had backed into a parking meter 6 months ago, and blamed it on the poorly designed parking lot. The dispatcher assured me they'd flag it in the system and that it was only a matter of time before a patrol unit spotted it. I thanked her, hung up, and felt a warm sense of satisfaction spread through my chest. This was going to be good. This was going to be really, really good. It took less than 12 hours. I got the call Tuesday morning at around 10 while I was in a project meeting at work. I stepped out to take it, and Officer Daniels, yes, the same older cop from Thursday night, informed me they'd pulled over the vehicle about 20 minutes ago, 2 towns away from where I lived. Your wife was pretty surprised when we told her the vehicle was reported stolen, he said, and I could hear the amusement in his voice. She's claiming you gave her permission to use it. I actually had to bite back a laugh because I was still technically at work and professional behavior was expected. Officer Daniels, I gave her permission to use it when we were together. We're not together anymore. She announced her engagement to another man, moved out of my house, and took my car without asking. That's not permission, that's theft. That's what we figured, he replied. We've impounded the vehicle. You can pick it up at the station whenever you're ready. Your wife is, well, she's not happy about the situation. Not happy. That was probably the understatement of the year. I thanked Officer Daniels, told him I'd be there within the hour, and went back into my meeting with a smile that probably made me look like I'd just won the lottery. My boss noticed and asked if everything was okay. Everything's great, I said, just handling some personal business. All good things. I left work early. One of the perks of being a project director with a good track record is that you can occasionally take personal time without anyone asking too many questions, and headed to the police station. When I got there, Officer Daniels was waiting for me at the front desk with my car keys and some paperwork to sign. Your wife called the station about 6 times already, he informed me while I signed the release forms. She wants to know how she's supposed to get around now. She also threatened to sue the department for unlawful seizure of property. I looked up from the paperwork. Did you explain to her that you can't unlawfully seize property from someone who doesn't own it? He grinned. We did. Multiple times. She's having trouble with that concept. Yeah, concepts aren't really her strong suit, I said, taking my keys and heading out to the impound lot. The SUV was right where they'd parked it, looking exactly the same as it had when Clara had driven off with it Thursday night. I got in, adjusted the seat that she'd moved, changed the radio station from whatever pop garbage she'd been listening to, and drove it straight home. The whole drive felt like a victory lap. Every mile between the police station and my house was another mile away from Clara's drama and another mile closer to getting my life back in order. My phone started ringing before I'd even pulled into my driveway. Clara's number, which I still hadn't blocked because I figured I'd need to maintain some form of communication for the divorce proceedings. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Voicemail again. By the time I got inside my house, she'd called 4 more times and left 3 voicemails that I wasn't going to listen to because I valued my blood pressure. Then the texts started coming through, and these I did read because they were absolutely golden. You reported my car stolen? Was the first one, and I appreciated the use of all caps and the exclamation point because it really conveyed the appropriate level of outrage. How am I supposed to get to work? How am I supposed to get anywhere? This is insane. Another message. The police pulled me over and impounded the car. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? People saw, and then my favorite. You let me use that car when we were together. You can't just take it back. That's not how it works. I sat down on my couch, cracked open a beer even though it was only 2 in the afternoon because some occasions call for day drinking, and typed out my response. Correction, I reported my car that you took without permission after moving out. The car is registered in my name, paid for with my money, and insured on my policy. You had permission to use it when you were my wife. Now you're engaged to Miles. Let Miles Uber you to forever. I hit send and immediately blocked her number because I was done with that particular conversation. She paid $81 for a ride home that day. I know because Miles posted about it on Facebook, complaining about abusive behavior and financial manipulation and how they'd had to pay for an expensive rideshare because I'd illegally taken back my own car. The comments section roasted him alive. Someone wrote, "Dude, it's his car. What part of this is illegal?" Another person commented, "Maybe you should buy your fiancée her own car instead of complaining that her ex-husband wants his back." My favorite response came from someone who wrote, "This is what happens when you propose to someone else's wife. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes." In this case, the prize is an $81 Uber ride. I slept like a baby that night, like a man whose gas tank was finally safe, whose property was secure, and whose ex-wife was officially someone else's transportation problem. 3 days later, I learned that Miles and Clara were apparently not the type to learn from their mistakes. You'd think after getting kicked out by police, losing a social media battle, and having a car impounded, they might take the hint that continuing to escalate this situation was a bad idea. But no, these two had the survival instincts of lemmings running toward a cliff, and Wednesday night proved they were committed to following through on their terrible decision-making all the way to the bottom. It was around 9 in the evening. I was watching some nature documentary about penguins because my life had reached a level of peace where I could actually enjoy educational programming without someone complaining about it, when I heard it. Banging. Loud, aggressive banging on my front door that made it sound like someone was trying to break through using nothing but their fists and misplaced confidence. My first thought was that maybe it was an emergency. Maybe a neighbor needed help. My second thought, the more accurate one, was that Miles had returned with reinforcements and a complete lack of common sense. I checked my new Ring doorbell camera. Thank God I'd installed that thing. And sure enough, there they were. Miles and 3 of his friends, standing on my porch like the world's least threatening mob. I recognized Man Bun from last time, but the other 2 were new additions to this comedy tour. One of them looked like he'd wandered off from a gym Instagram photo shoot, all muscles and tank top despite it being evening in October. The other one had the general appearance of someone who'd gotten lost on the way to a craft brewery and somehow ended up here instead. All 4 of them were shouting variations of "Let her in" and "We know you're home," like they were reenacting some kind of low-budget action movie. I didn't even bother going to the door. Instead, I pulled out my phone, dialed 911, and put it on speaker so I could still watch the show on my Ring camera. The dispatcher answered with the now familiar greeting, and I said, probably sounding way too casual for someone reporting a potential break-in, "Hi, this is Graham Stone again. Same house, new idiots. I've got 4 men banging on my door demanding to be let in, and I'm pretty sure they're about to try something really stupid." The dispatcher, who I swear sounded like she was trying not to laugh, asked me to confirm my address and stay on the line. And then Miles and his discount Avengers did exactly what I knew they were going to do. They tried the back door. I watched on my security cameras as they walked around the side of my house, Man Bun leading the way like some kind of terrible scout, and headed straight for my back patio. The camera caught everything in beautiful 4K HDR quality. Miles trying the door handle, realizing it was locked, and then actually attempting to jimmy it open with what looked like a credit card. A credit card. Like we were in some heist movie and not real life, where breaking and entering is actually illegal. "They're trying to break in through my back door now," I informed the dispatcher, still watching the security feed like it was the most entertaining show I'd seen all week. "I've got it all on camera. Clear footage of faces, attempted forced entry, the whole thing." The dispatcher assured me units were already on the way and advised me to stay inside and away from the doors. I assured her I had no intention of getting involved when the entertainment was this good and the police were already en route. The gym bro tried to help Miles with the door, pulling on the handle while Miles worked the credit card, and honestly, it would have been sad if it wasn't so hilarious. They were having an entire whispered argument that my cameras were picking up perfectly. "Dude, this isn't working," gym bro said. "Try harder," Miles hissed back. "Maybe if you actually helped instead of just standing there." That's when one of them, the craft brewery guy, pulled out what looked like an actual lockpick set. A lockpick set. These idiots had come prepared with burglary tools and apparently thought that was going to end well for them. That's also when I heard the sirens. Beautiful, glorious sirens getting closer by the second. I watched on the cameras as all 4 of them froze like deer in headlights, looked at each other in panic, and then tried to casually walk back toward the front of the house like they'd just been out for an evening stroll and definitely hadn't been attempting to break into someone's home. Too little, too late, gentlemen. Way too late. 2 police cars rolled up, lights blazing, and I finally went to my front door to watch the show in person. Officer Daniels was there again. At this point, we were practically best friends, along with 3 other officers who looked like they were having the time of their lives. The cops had all 4 of them against the side of the house before Miles could even start his explanation. "Officers, this is all a misunderstanding," he began, but Officer Daniels cut him off immediately. "Son, we've got a 911 call, security footage, and you've got lockpicks in your pocket. What exactly do you think you're misunderstanding?" Craft brewery guy, who apparently had the lockpick set, got cuffed right there for possession of burglary tools and attempted breaking and entering. He started protesting that he'd just bought them online, and this was the first time he tried to use them, which honestly made it worse somehow. The other 2 friends were getting trespass warnings, formal documentation that they weren't allowed on my property under penalty of arrest. And Miles? Miles was standing there looking like his entire world was falling apart, which it probably was. "This man has stolen her belongings," Miles shouted, trying one last desperate angle. "We were just trying to get her stuff back. She has a right to her property." Officer Daniels turned to me with an expression that suggested he'd heard every excuse possible in his career, and this wasn't even in the top 10. "Mr. Stone, does this man or any of his associates have permission to be on your property?" I shook my head. "Absolutely not. They showed up uninvited, attempted to break into my house, and brought burglary tools. I've never given any of them permission to be here, and I have no intention of ever doing so." "There you go," Officer Daniels said, turning back to Miles. "No permission, attempted forced entry, burglary tools. You want to keep digging this hole deeper, or are we done here?" Miles opened his mouth, probably to threaten lawyers again, and I couldn't help myself. I walked to my window, the one that had a perfect view of all four of them standing there in various states of legal trouble, and raised my beer in a mock toast. "Good luck affording a lawyer, champ. I hear breaking and entering charges really eat into your legal budget." His face went purple, actual purple, like an eggplant that had just received terrible news. He started yelling something about how this wasn't over, how he was going to sue me, how I couldn't get away with this. But Officer Daniels was already guiding him firmly toward the street with instructions to leave and never come back. All four of them got formal trespass warnings. Craft brewery guy got arrested and taken away in cuffs, and the other three had to walk back to wherever they'd parked while the officers made sure they actually left. Officer Daniels came back to my door after they'd all cleared out. "Mr. Stone, I'm going to be honest with you. I've been doing this job for 27 years, and this is one of the stupider things I've seen people do over a breakup." I nodded in agreement. "Officer Daniels, I'm starting to think Miles isn't very bright." He actually laughed at that. "You might be onto something there. Keep your security system active, keep recording everything, and if they come back, call us immediately. At this point, you've got enough for a restraining order if you want one." I thanked him, watched the patrol cars drive away, and went back inside to my penguins. They were still doing their penguin things, living their simple penguin lives, free from the drama of ex-wives and their incredibly stupid fiancés. I envied them for a moment, then remembered I had beer, property rights, and a security system that had just captured the world's dumbest attempted break-in. Life was pretty good, all things considered. A week went by after the great break-in disaster, and things finally started to settle into something resembling normalcy. The police had made it abundantly clear to Miles and his crew that showing up at my house again would result in immediate arrest. Clara had apparently moved back in with her parents after whatever arrangement she'd had with Miles fell through, shocking absolutely no one. And I was finally able to exist in my own home without expecting some kind of dramatic confrontation every other day. It was peaceful, quiet, almost boring, which after the past 2 weeks felt like winning the lottery. Then Patricia called again. Clara's mom, the woman who'd initially been ready to rip me apart for throwing her daughter out, then completely reversed course once she learned the actual story instead of Clara's heavily edited version. Her voice on the phone was different this time, though. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. Bone-deep exhausted in the way that comes from realizing your kid has been lying to everyone, including you, and you've spent years enabling behavior that probably should have been corrected a long time ago. "Graham, can we meet?" she asked. "I'd like to talk to you in person if you're willing. I understand if you don't want to, but I think it would be good for both of us." I agreed, partly because Patricia had always been decent to me, and partly because I was curious what this conversation was going to be about. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between my house and where she lived, neutral territory where neither of us had home field advantage. I got there first, ordered a black coffee because caffeine makes everything better, and waited. Patricia showed up about 5 minutes later looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past 2 weeks. Her hair had more gray in it than I remembered, or maybe I was just noticing it now. She had that particular expression that parents get when their children disappoint them in ways they can't quite fix, a mixture of sadness, frustration, and resignation. We sat down at a corner table, and she didn't waste time with small talk. "Graham, I owe you an apology." Several apologies, actually. I started to say something polite and dismissive, but she held up her hand. "No, let me finish. I need to say this. Clara has been lying to all of us. Me, her father, her siblings, her friends. She told us you two had been separated for months, that you'd agreed to see other people, that you'd been emotionally distant, and she'd tried everything to save the marriage. She painted this picture of you as this cold, absent husband who didn't care about her anymore. And we believed her, because she's our daughter and you're supposed to believe your children when they come to you with problems. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through something. Then I started asking questions. Real questions, not just accepting her version of events. I talked to her sister, who mentioned seeing social media posts of you two together just a few weeks ago looking perfectly happy. I looked at her Facebook and saw a post from a month ago where she was talking about date night with my amazing husband. I found text messages on the family phone plan. Yes, I looked, and I don't care if that's invasive at this point, where she was telling you she loved you the same week she was apparently planning this engagement announcement. Everything was a lie, Graham. All of it. I nodded slowly, sipping my coffee and not sure what to say. Patricia continued, pulling papers out of her purse and sliding them across the table. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts. I also started looking at finances because Clara's been asking us for money constantly. She said it was because you weren't contributing to household expenses, that she was struggling to keep up with bills. But these, she tapped the papers, show the opposite. Every bill was in your name. Every payment came from your account. She wasn't contributing anything except complaints. Yeah, I said quietly. That's accurate. Patricia looked like she might cry, which was uncomfortable because I'd never seen her even remotely emotional before. She was usually the composed one in the family, the voice of reason, the person who held everything together. Graham, I am so sorry. We raised her better than this. Or at least, we tried to. Her father and I have been talking, and we realize we've been making excuses for her behavior for years. She's always been our baby, our youngest, and maybe we let her get away with too much. But this is beyond anything we could have imagined. She pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. I stared at it, not touching it. What's this? Patricia took a deep breath. $5,000. It's not much, and it doesn't begin to cover what she took from you over the years, but it's something. It's our apology for enabling her, for not seeing what she was doing, for believing her lies without question. Please take it. You don't have to, but we want you to. We need you to understand that we don't support what she did. We're horrified by it. I tried to refuse. It felt weird taking money from Clara's parents when none of this was their fault. They didn't tell their daughter to cheat, to get engaged while still married, to use my money to fund her affair. But Patricia insisted with a firmness that suggested this wasn't up for negotiation. Graham, we enabled her for years. Every time she got herself into trouble, we bailed her out. Every time she made a mess, we cleaned it up. We taught her that actions don't have consequences, and that was wrong. This is us taking responsibility for our part in creating the person who did this to you. Please, let us do this one thing. I took the envelope, not because I needed the money, but because I could tell Patricia needed me to take it. She needed to feel like she'd done something to make this right, even though she had nothing to apologize for. Thank you, I said. And for what it's worth, you and Clara's dad were always good to me. This isn't on you. People make their own choices. Patricia smiled sadly. That's kind of you to say, but we both know we played a part. We're cutting her off, by the way. Financially, emotionally, not completely. She's still our daughter, but we're done making excuses. She needs to face the consequences of her actions, and we've been preventing that for too long. We talked for another 20 minutes, Patricia filling me in on what was happening with Clara. Apparently, Miles had broken up with her 3 days after the attempted break-in. Turns out when your new fiancé's drama involves police visits, attempted burglary charges for your friends, and general chaos, the relationship loses some of its appeal. Who could have seen that coming? Clara was working part-time at some boutique in the mall, living in her childhood bedroom, and posting Instagram quotes about Phoenix's rising from ashes, which everyone was rightfully mocking in the comments. She keeps saying this is all temporary, that she's going to bounce back stronger than ever, Patricia said with a sigh. I think she genuinely believes that. She doesn't understand that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. I finished my coffee and stood up to leave. Patricia stood too, and then did something unexpected. She hugged me. Not a long hug, just a brief, firm embrace that felt like closure. Thank you for meeting with me, Graham. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what our daughter put you through. I left that coffee shop with $5,000 I didn't expect and a weird sense of resolution I didn't know I needed. Patricia wasn't responsible for Clara's choices, but her apology meant something anyway. It meant at least one person in Clara's family understood reality and was willing to acknowledge it. That was worth more than the check, honestly. I deposited the money that afternoon and took myself out to a nice dinner that evening. Steak, good wine, no dramatic announcements about engagements. Just a quiet meal where I could sit and appreciate how far I'd come from that Thursday night when my life imploded over spaghetti. Clara's mom had called her behavior a subscription plan that she'd finally canceled for me. That was exactly what it felt like, canceling a service I should have discontinued years ago and finally getting a refund. 3 months later, and I was living a life I didn't even know was possible back when Clara was announcing her engagement over my good wine. It's funny how quickly things can change when you remove the source of chaos from your environment. Turns out when you're not constantly managing someone else's drama, dealing with their financial irresponsibility, or wondering what fresh hell is going to walk through your door, life actually becomes pretty enjoyable. Who knew? Clara, from what I'd heard through the grapevine, because people love updating you on your ex's misfortunes, and honestly, I wasn't going to stop them, was still living with her parents in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by participation trophies and yearbooks from high school. She'd kept the part-time job at the boutique, which apparently paid just enough to cover her phone bill and her Starbucks addiction, but not much else. Her Instagram had transformed into this bizarre museum of inspirational quotes about strength and resilience. The kind of stuff that sounds deep if you're 14 or going through your first breakup, but just reads as desperate when you're a grown woman who blew up her own life. My favorite post, the one that really captured the complete lack of self-awareness, was a picture of a phoenix with the caption, "The phoenix must burn to rise." Someone in the comments, bless their savage heart, had written, "Or you could just not light yourself on fire in the first place," and gotten 300 likes. Another comment read, "Girl, you're not a phoenix. You're just someone who made bad choices," which was harsh but accurate. She deleted both comments within an hour, but screenshots are forever, and the internet had preserved them for posterity. Miles, the fiancé who'd lasted all of 3 weeks after proposing, had moved on with impressive speed. His Instagram was now full of gym selfies with captions like "Focus on yourself" and "Growth mindset," and other pseudo-intellectual garbage that guys post when they're trying to look deep but are really just taking shirtless pictures in their bathroom mirror. He'd apparently told people that Clara was too much drama and he needed to prioritize his peace, which was hilarious coming from the guy who'd shown up at my house with burglary tools. But sure, Miles, you're all about that peaceful life now. Whatever helps you sleep at night, champ. The real winner in all of this, though, that was me. My house was quiet in the best possible way. Bills were smaller because I wasn't funding someone else's lifestyle. My passwords were longer and more secure because I'd changed everything the day after Clara left. The locks had been changed, the security system was upgraded, and I'd even gotten new sheets for the bed because the old ones had too many memories attached to them, and I wasn't about to sleep on those anymore. It was like I'd done a complete system reset on my entire life, and the result was actually functioning properly for the first time in years. I'd started dating again about 6 weeks after everything went down, mostly because my friend Marcus had insisted I needed to get back out there and stop letting Clara's nonsense define my social life. He'd set me up with Sophie, a financial analyst he worked with who he swore was nothing like your ex-wife. I promise, this woman has her life together. And you know what? Marcus was right. Sophie was incredible. She split checks without making it weird, owned her own car that she paid for herself, had her own apartment with her own furniture, and most importantly, had never once announced an engagement to another man over dinner. The bar was low, I'll admit, but she cleared it by miles. No pun intended. Our first date had been at this little Italian place downtown, and I'd briefly hesitated when she suggested Italian because the last time I'd eaten Italian food, my life had exploded. But Sophie had laughed when I told her that story, called Clara absolutely unhinged in the most matter-of-fact way possible, and then proceeded to have a completely normal dinner conversation with me about work, hobbies, and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. No dramatic announcements, no hidden agendas, just two adults having a meal and enjoying each other's company. It was revolutionary. We'd been seeing each other for about 2 months now, and it was the easiest relationship I'd ever been in. Sophie communicated like an actual adult, didn't play mind games, and when she said she was going to do something, she actually did it. Wild concept, I know. She'd met my friends, I'd met hers, and nobody had any concerns about hidden fiancés or secret double lives. Her biggest flaw was that she was obsessed with true crime podcasts and would sometimes tell me horrifying murder stories over breakfast. But honestly, after everything I'd been through with Clara, that was manageable. Sometimes, usually on weekends when I was driving around running errands, or just enjoying the freedom of going wherever I wanted without having to check in with anyone, I'd pass by that Italian restaurant where Clara had dropped her engagement bomb. It was still there, still serving pasta to unsuspecting couples who had no idea that 3 months ago, someone's marriage had died on table 7 right next to the breadsticks. I'd think about that night, about Clara's excited face when she showed me that ring, about how genuinely surprised she'd been when I didn't react with enthusiasm to her announcement. I still remembered her exact words. "I'm engaged. Isn't it exciting?" Delivered with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for announcing lottery winnings or surprise vacations, not the destruction of a marriage. And I remembered my reply, the one that had set everything in motion, the response that had apparently been so shocking to her that she'd never quite recovered from it. "Congratulations to you both." 3 words. Simple, polite, absolutely dripping with the kind of sarcasm that comes from a place of complete and total doneness with someone's nonsense. Looking back now, that might have been the best line I'd ever delivered in my entire life. Not because it was particularly clever or cutting, but because it was the moment I stopped playing along with Clara's delusion that she could have everything both ways. She wanted to be engaged to Miles and still live in my house, still use my resources, still maintain the comfortable life I provided while pursuing her exciting new relationship. And that one simple response, "Congratulations to you both," had shut that whole fantasy down before it could even get started. Because that was the night I finally got engaged too. Not to another person, not to some rebound relationship or desperate attempt to prove I was over my ex. No, I got engaged to something way better than that. I got engaged to peace, to silence, to mornings where I woke up without that vague sense of dread, to evenings where I could watch whatever I wanted on TV without commentary, to a life where my money stayed in my account, my car stayed in my garage, and my house remained drama-free. I got engaged to locks that actually worked, to passwords only I knew, to a future that didn't involve funding someone else's affair or entertaining their ridiculous requests for continued housing after betrayal. Clara had wanted to start a new chapter in her life, and honestly, I had to thank her for that. Because in blowing up our marriage in the most spectacularly stupid way possible, she'd freed me to start my own new chapter. One where I actually got to be happy instead of just pretending everything was fine while slowly dying inside. She'd done me a favor, really, even if that wasn't her intention. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, and all you have to do is change the locks behind it. So yeah, 3 months later, life was good. Really, genuinely good. Sophie and I had plans to check out a new restaurant next weekend. Not Italian. We'd agreed to avoid Italian for a while. And my house was finally starting to feel like mine again instead of a crime scene I had to live in. The divorce papers were filed, the lawyers were handling everything, and Clara was somebody else's problem now. Well, mostly her own problem, which was probably the most appropriate ending to this whole saga. Every once in a while, I get an update from someone about what Clara was doing, what she was posting, who she was blaming for her current situation. And every time, I'd listen politely, nod in appropriate places, and then go back to my peaceful, drama-free life without giving it another thought. Because here's what I'd learned from this whole experience. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just living well, changing your locks, and never letting someone treat your home like a hotel for their affair ever again. And if I ever found myself at that Italian restaurant again, maybe for an anniversary dinner with Sophie years down the line, I'd probably request a different table. Not because I was traumatized or bitter, but because table 7 would always be the place where my old life ended and my new one began. Where Clara announced her engagement, and I accidentally announced mine to a future where I actually mattered in my own life. That table deserved a plaque, honestly. Here lies Graham Stone's failed marriage. Died Thursday, 9 p.m., cause of death, audacity, and spaghetti. May it rest in peace and never, ever be resurrected. Best Thursday night of my life.